It was evening and Claire was comfortably settled in her castle, preparing for dinner. But then Tom came and angrily rushed at her with loud words that Samantha died because of her. The main character didn't understand what had happened, why he was talking like that. She asked Tom, not believing her ears, what he meant, whether Samantha really was dead. Tom started screaming that it was all her husband, Brooks Lawrence, and he destroyed her entire Bronson line because of accusations of treason. But the worst thing is that he killed her, Samantha, his own wife. Claire was shocked. She stared at one point in horror and said, "How so?" The heroine burst into tears and fell to the floor, not understanding how Brooks could be so cruel. But suddenly Tom told her abruptly and rudely that she should have died instead of Samantha, and reminded her that she had once refused to marry Brooks Lawrence. Claire, with tears in her eyes, told him that he was wrong, that she had always loved only him and wanted to be his wife, which is why she gave up Brooks. The guy told her with deep regret that the place of the mistress of the Reacher family did not belong to her, and in general, why it should be her. And then he grabbed her tightly by the shoulders and began to shake her, shouting at her that this was not her place. The heroine was in great pain. Her soul ached from the pain, and Tom was squeezing her shoulders tightly. She asked him to stop, but he continued to shout at her that Samantha should have been standing in front of him now, not her. Luckily, the maids arrived in time and pulled Claire out of her husband's arms, while Tom's assistant tried to calm his master. The hero grabbed his assistant in a stupor. There were tears in his eyes. He only sighed loudly and said Samantha's name. Claire cried without stopping. She suddenly realized that he only needed her Samantha. She thought to herself that he wished she were here, and that she needed to die in her place. The heroine began to remember her half-sister Samantha, her stepmother's daughter, how smiling and beautiful she was. After all, even before her marriage to Tom Reacher, she guessed that he was not indifferent to her sister. But she always hoped that this was a fleeting feeling. Claire couldn't calm down. She cried and kept saying that if she had known that this would happen, she would have married Brooks Lawrence and Samantha would have stayed alive. The maids prepared a hot bath with rose petals for the heroine and brought her a bottle of wine. Claire sat down in the bath and, staring at her glass of wine, asked the maid where her husband Tom was. The maid told her that he had gone to work and would be very late. She asked her to leave her alone and not let anyone in, took a glass of wine and thought. Holding a glass in her hand, she hesitated for a long time before deciding whether to drink it, because there was poison in it. She thought that she could leave this world without regrets, because Tom already had another woman, very similar to her sister Samantha, and she would be able to comfort him. After taking a few sips, the main character lost consciousness, and the glass fell from her hands and shattered into pieces. Her last words were, "Tom, I will die just like you wanted." And suddenly, there was darkness, but the girl heard someone's voice asking her to wake up. She opened her eyes convulsively and did not understand what was happening. Claire looked around and tried to understand what kind of place this was. Wasn't she dead? Had she drunk poison, or maybe she was found so quickly? A maid was sitting next to her and smiling. She said to her, "Thank God you woke up, miss." But then Claire recognized her. It was Mia, and asked her what she was doing here. And then it dawned on her that she was in her room, but she didn't understand how this was possible, because there was nothing left of the house 7 years ago during the fire. A man came into the room and told her how glad he was that she had finally woken up. Claire's jaw dropped. She couldn't believe her eyes. After all, it was her father. He was smiling at her and waiting for her to come up to him to hug him. But the heroine was very surprised by these events, because her father had died a long time ago. 4 days passed. The weather was wonderful. The sun was shining very brightly. Claire was having breakfast in her room and still couldn't understand what could have happened. The girl stood up and walked to the mirror, looking at herself. She thought that she had returned to the past, that she had woken up in a time when she was 22 years old. She walked around the room and thought, the Bronson family is not yet destroyed. She is not yet married to Tom, and her sister is not yet married to Brooks Lawrence. Brooks's image appeared in her mind, and she thought that this time she had to do everything differently. The heroine accepts Brooks' proposal to marry her, and he thanks her for honoring him with such an honor. But she only thinks about becoming Brooks' wife, not Tom's, marrying a man who will destroy her entire family and kill her. Claire has already resigned herself to her fate. Since death awaits her, she will jump into the very center of events and try to live at least a little better. The Bronson mansion, Tom came to her during breakfast. She got up from the table and told him not to think that after the engagement was called off, they would now remain friends. The guy was silent. Claire said that she was no longer his fiancée, not his lover, and certainly not his girlfriend. Tom was stunned. He looked into her eyes and asked what she meant, why she said that. The heroine just lowered her head and told him that he was now Samantha's fiancé and asked him to behave appropriately, at least for her sake. The guy remained silent, and it seemed to Claire that he was not at all upset. The first thing the main character did after returning to life was break off her engagement with Tom. And surprisingly, it was quite simple, and yet such a trifle brought her so much suffering. They sat down at a table, and Claire told him that she hoped he wouldn't come to her again for personal reasons. Tom couldn't believe it. He asked her why she decided so. But the main character remained silent and looked at the guy with sadness. He slammed his fist on the table and angrily asked her if it was true that she had agreed to marry Lawrence, and asked for the reason, whether he had forced her. Claire sighed heavily and said that it had nothing to do with Brooks. But Tom still wouldn't calm down. He couldn't understand the reason because she didn't dream of that, but always wanted a real loving family, and he told her that you can't find happiness in a marriage of convenience. The girl looked at the guy sadly and told him that he knew what she dreamed about but still wanted her sister. Then Claire plucked up the courage and told him that she didn't want to see him anymore, and their relationship was over. But Tom didn't like it. He told her to think it over again because a political marriage meant there would be no love, and he really didn't want her to go through that. Claire only told him mockingly that love was not her priority now, and that she was not getting any younger. It was better to hurry up and get married, otherwise who would give her this love? Perhaps Tom. The guy couldn't answer anything. There was a deathly silence in the room. The heroine thought that even if she had 100 lives, she would not marry him. Finally, he broke the silence and asked for her hand, saying that he would break off his engagement with Samantha and that they would get married. The heroine was shocked by this, and just as she wanted to tell him that he had gone crazy, someone entered the room. It was Brooks Lawrence. He was standing in the doorway smiling. They turned to him and he said, "What an awkward situation." Claire and Tom looked at him in surprise, and she could only say his name, not believing her eyes. But Tom decided to tell him how dare he come in here. To this, Brooks only answered him with a smile that he had come here to visit his fiancée and was not going to ask his permission for that. He presented the heroine with a beautiful bouquet of roses, to which she thanked him and told him that she was very surprised by his arrival and why he didn't even warn her. Brooks only answered her sarcastically that he himself was very surprised because they had already agreed to be engaged, and he did not think that he needed her ex's permission to visit. Tom was very angry with him, but Brooks decided to drive him away with his magic and said goodbye to him, telling him at the end that he and his bride had a lot to discuss. There was a bright flash. Everything in the room lit up, and with one wave of his hand, Brooks made Tom disappear. Claire was amazed and asked the groom where he had put it, what had happened to it. He laughed and told her not to worry because Tom was a skilled knight and would come back without any problems. He sent him to a picturesque place to cool off a bit. The girl was impressed by his skills and asked the Marquis if it was teleportation and said that he was very good at magic. He said it was a simple spell and asked her to call him by his name, Brooks. After all, she calls her ex by his first name and him by his last name, and this upsets him a lot. Claire told him that Tom was just a childhood friend, and that was all. Brooks told her to call him Sir Reacher or Prince Reacher and asked why her ex-fiancé had come to see her. She told him that Tom felt responsible to her for calling off the engagement and was afraid that he would suffer in a political marriage. Brooks asked her if it wasn't his fault. She said yes, because he likes her sister, and that's why he broke off the engagement. The heroine was still thinking about where Tom was now. What was wrong with him? How was he? At this time, Tom found himself in some unfamiliar forest. It was very quiet. Only from afar could he hear owls screaming and whistling. He walked along the path, not understanding where he was and cursing Lawrence. And then a huge green predator with large, sharp fangs crept up on him from behind and growled. Tom was startled by the unexpectedness and slowly turned towards the predator, preparing his sword to plunge into it during the attack. As soon as he turned around, the beast growled and jumped on him. The hero managed to raise his sword and plunged it straight into the neck. Tom sat right on the beast and opened the navigation artifact to find out his location. He studied the map carefully and realized that he was on Devil's Mountain. The hero gritted his teeth and said the name Brooks Lawrence. He remembered that this mountain was declared forbidden by the royal family and that this place was a haven for monsters, where no human had set foot for 4 years. 3 weeks later, Brooks Lawrence and Claire Bronson got married in a lavish ceremony with many guests. Claire was beaming. She was so beautiful in that pink and white dress, she said to herself. Finally, she was marrying Lawrence. The maids were hovering around the bride, fixing her hair and makeup, because the celebration was about to begin. Someone entered the room and asked if the bride was ready. Claire stood with her back turned and saw her stepmother. Her half-sister Samantha also came with her mother. The stepmother did not congratulate Claire, but only emphasized what great influence the Marquis of Lawrence had, that the proposal was only 3 weeks old, and such a magnificent wedding was already prepared. But Samantha decided to congratulate her sister and told her that she wished her a happy marriage and long life. Claire thanked her and asked about her wedding with Tom, whether it was expected next year, and said that she would hardly be able to attend. Samantha told her that there was nothing wrong with it, that she would have a lot to do anyway and had no time to celebrate. After a short silence, Samantha asked her about Tom, whether he had contacted her. The girl was surprised that he still hadn't returned from the mountains and told her sister that he hadn't contacted her. Samantha said he sent her a message saying he would be staying for a while, but she doesn't understand why he would be training since it's very dangerous in those mountains. Claire sympathetically replied that she didn't know, but she couldn't tell him that Brooks had sent him there. The wedding celebration begins. Everything is decorated with flowers and colorful flags. Fireworks are launched. The bride approached the altar, where the groom was waiting for her. The priest began to read a prayer. The bride and groom stood and listened to him. Here the priest asked the bride whether she swears her love to the groom until death. Claire looked at her fiancé and he smiled back at her. She lowered her head and sighed softly. Then she looked at him again and said that she swears. The priest said that now the groom could kiss his bride. They said goodbye to their guests and sailed away on a ship to spend their honeymoon. In the evening, Claire sat on the deck in one dress and looked sadly into the water. Then Brooks came up behind her and thoughtfully put his jacket on her, and she thanked him for his concern. He told her that there was no need to thank him, because she was now his wife, and said that she was no longer Claire Bronson, but Madame Claire Lawrence. The girl became embarrassed and only shyly said that she was not used to it yet. She suddenly remembered that her ex-fiancé Tom never called her Madame Crawford, as if he didn't consider her his wife at all. He simply called her Claire Bronson. Suddenly, Brooks asked her why she didn't become a duchess. The girl looked at him in surprise and said that this did not suit her, that she was not very good at small talk. He asked her what she dreamed about then. After thinking for a bit, the girl replied that she wanted a loving family after seeing her parents' marriage, in which there was not a drop of happiness. She also said that she always dreamed of marrying her beloved, starting a family, having children, and living a normal life. The guy listened to her and said that he knew how difficult it was for people in their position to achieve this. The heroine agreed with him, said that this is why she gave up and that her dream no longer exists. But her heart was calmer and asked him what he dreamed about. He thought for a moment and said that he dreams of absolute power, so that no one would be an obstacle to him. And this goal is more important to him than thousands of lives. Claire froze in amazement, but it turned out that he was just joking and said that he wanted to enjoy family life. The girl smiled and reassured him, saying that his dream would definitely come true soon. The heroine thought about her fiancé. Here he is, Brooks Lawrence, who destroyed the Bronson family, one of the two great ducal families, being the illegitimate son of the previous emperor, received the title of Archduke. And when his dream comes true, she will already be dead. Brooks suddenly asked her if she thought they would have a good honeymoon. The girl did not answer, and he continued, putting his hand on his heart. He told her that even if he did not give her love, he would cherish her as much as possible. She said that she believed him, that he would not give love, looked into his eyes, and they merged in a kiss. While kissing, she thought to herself and prayed that he would not love her because she no longer wanted to trust something that was unreliable. Tom appeared at the palace of the Bronson Duchy, sword in hand, his clothes dirty and torn. People around started whispering about him, wondering what could have happened to him. As soon as he approached the palace, the guards came up to him, telling him to get out of there quickly, to which the hero told him to pass on the news that Tom Crawford had returned. Meanwhile, rumors had already reached Lawrence's estate that Tom had returned. Mason Dawes, Brooks's longtime servant, confirmed this. Brooks said with annoyance that it came back pretty quickly. He should have thrown it further away. He then ordered his servant to make sure that Claire did not find out about anything. The servant dared to remark that the master was very concerned about Miss Claire. Brooks looked sternly at the servant and told him not to dare to speak like that again. She was now his wife, and also the mistress of this estate. Mason apologized to the owner, but again wanted to say something about Miss Clare. But Brooks scolded him and told him to mind his business. The servant left, leaving his master alone with thoughts of Tom Reacher. The next day, Brooks brought Claire into his beautiful garden. The garden was simply magnificent. She was delighted. The guy looked at her and was proud that she was impressed. Then he asked her if she liked this magnificent garden with flowers. The girl replied yes, she liked it, and said that the garden looked like a meadow with jewels. Brooks said he didn't think about the fact that she didn't like bright things. It was his mistake. He should have asked her opinion first. She countered by saying that yes, the brightness of the roses was a bit overwhelming, but she didn't hate them, and the gardener must have tried very hard. The guy laughed and said that it was just his little hobby, because with magic everything becomes easier. The heroine was surprised that it was really possible to create such a garden with the help of magic. He told her that with the help of magic you can do anything. Magic can fulfill dreams or attack someone. It all depends on the desire of the sorcerer. Claire was very impressed and listened to him further with interest. The guy then asked her if she wanted him to teach her magic. She was surprised and said that it was not worth teaching. She could not use it. The main character told how in childhood she tried to use magic for a long time, and no matter how much money and time she spent on it, it was all in vain. She has no talent. Claire looked at Brooks again and told him she didn't think she could learn. He told her that a person can never be sure of what he is capable of, and she should not worry, because her teacher is the best magician in the world. The girl laughed and promised that she would think about his proposal. It was getting dark and the sky was enveloped in a fiery sunset, creating soft shades of orange, pink, and purple. Brooks led his wife into a luxurious light room with a large, soft bed and told her that this was her bedroom. She looked around the bedroom and saw a portal. Brooks told her that she could use it whenever she wanted since she was on the 4th floor. Claire was amazed that the mansion had such a portal and remarked on how convenient it was. And he just laughed, asking what she expected from a magician's estate. When the girl approached the bed, she noticed that there was only one bed, but where was his bedroom? She asked. Brooks asked her with annoyance if she didn't want to share a room with him. She lowered her head and said that as much as she didn't mind, she suddenly remembered how she lived with Tom. They had separate rooms, and she always thought that it was normal. The guy asked her again if she was okay with them sleeping together in the same bed. She replied that she was okay with it. The heroine had sadness in her eyes. She understood that married couples sleep in the same bed, and this is quite normal. Afterwards, she decided to ask him about children, whether he wanted them soon, since she certainly wasn't going to avoid her marital duties. But she didn't want to rush into having children yet. Brooks agreed with her that it was too early for that. She closed her eyes and said that she would then take birth control pills. But the guy was against it. He said that there was no need for it. The pills had side effects, and anyway, it was a political marriage, so there was no need to rush. Brooks told her to focus on her health first and foremost, and to avoid anything that could harm her. The girl was very impressed by these words. She couldn't believe it. But she agreed with him and promised. The guy looked at her with some kind of longing, and his eyes filled with tears. Before Claire returned to the past when she died, Brooks was informed of this. He was informed that she had died of a heart attack and that shortly before her death she had used silver bell extract to lower her blood pressure. Brooks's faithful servant told his master that the problem was with the birth control pills. The combination of drugs had produced a side effect. Brooks closed his eyes, not wanting to believe it and thinking it over, but the servant continued, telling him that almost no one knew that she had been very worried and that he regretted the accident. The owner asked him again if he really thought it was an accident. It couldn't have been an accident. Servant Mason did not understand what his master wanted to say by this. Brooks said that before her marriage, Claire's mother was named Annie Waldorf and was from Dopes, and she died in exactly the same way from a heart attack caused by a silver bell. Then Mason realized what he was trying to say. Claire Bronson decided to leave just like her mother. The hero took his jacket and headed towards the exit and said that it was very lucky that she chose this method of suicide. We need to take her body. The servant asked him if he was sure that Tom would give up her body so easily. He turned to him and said that he would take her from there at any cost and left. Claire lay in a coffin strewn with white lilies. Tom stood next to her and cried, begging her to wake up and not leave him. Then Brooks came and told him that he had always neglected her before. Why hadn't he taken care of her before it was too late? Brooks came closer to the coffin where Tom and his servant were kneeling and said his name. Tom's anger flared and he took out his sword to stab him. Brooks also readied his sword and stood up to defend himself. Tom screamed that he was involved in the destruction of her family and ran up to him to plunge his sword into him. But he couldn't do it. Some magic in the form of a shield protected Brooks, and there was a bright blue light in the room. Tom was furious. He couldn't believe what happened to the sword. The magician only told him with a smile that he would not leave here without her body. Tom still wouldn't let up. He told him not to talk nonsense, that Reacher's family would not be left out and that he should just dare to lay a finger on them. Brooks told him that it wouldn't matter anymore. No matter what they did, he regretted what happened. He had no other choice. As soon as he snapped his fingers, the coffin rose into the air. Tom and the servants were frightened of what this sorcerer was doing. Tom turned to Brooks, shouting at him to let her go, that he dare not take her away from him. The magician turned to him and said that he should have thought about this earlier. A portal appeared in the room, into which Brooks directed the coffin and disappeared at the same moment. It is now past midnight, the moon is shining brightly, and its light is reflected in the room. Brooks and Claire sleep in the same bed with their backs to each other. But the girl does not sleep. She cannot fall asleep. She opens her eyes and wonders if her husband is sleeping now. She has never shared a bed with anyone before and can't take a deep breath for fear he might hear. Claire kept thinking and remembering that in her past life she had never spent the night with Tom, even though they were lovers and even got married. As soon as she closed her eyes, Brooks looked at her and thought how hard it must be for her to fall asleep. Claire finally fell asleep, and Brooks decided to get out of bed and headed for the door. Dungeon. Someone was calling for help from the dungeon and groaning. There sat a man in chains, dirty, exhausted, and covered in blood. The door creaked. The man raised his head and with difficulty said who was there. A man, apparently from a wealthy family, wearing black patent leather shoes entered the dungeon and asked Count Engels if he remembered him. The man immediately recognized him. As soon as he looked at his face, he said in surprise that it was he, Prince Brooks himself. The guy mockingly told him, "It's so hard to call an illegitimate child a prince." Afterwards, the guy introduced himself to the man and said that he was Brooks Lawrence. The man couldn't believe it. Could it really be true he was a marquis? Brooks said that although he was born a commoner, he tried to ingratiate himself, quickly gained fame, and received the title of marquis. This is how Brooks Lawrence became who he is today. The man refused to believe it and told him that it was absurd because the prince had once sold him into slavery. The guy confirmed his words and added that the man who bought it was called Waldorf. The man could not believe that it was Waldorf, and at that moment someone entered the dungeon and stood at the threshold. The prisoner looked at the man standing at the door. Brooks asked him if he had heard of them, because the head of the family can control the whole world with 3 fingers, and he holds 35% of the underground capital in his hands. "And this is his representative, Mason," Brooks said, pointing at the guy. The man lowered his head in annoyance and asked if it was true that the Waldorfs were involved in this. Brooks told him the situation he was now in. The man began to deny and said that he knew nothing, and that the Bronsons were to blame for everything. The hero laughed at him in response and said that since he said that he knew nothing, then from whom did the Empress receive the information about the illegitimate child? Could it have been from the Bronsons too? The prisoner didn't know what to answer him, and then Brooks suddenly grabbed him by the hair and threatened him that his patience was running out and that he should not waste his time. The hero continued to hold his hair, lifted his head and told him straight to his face that since she secretly supported the second prince, the first prince and the Bronsons decided to do everything quietly. But then she found out about the illegitimate child, and who told her about it, Brooks asked him. The man was silent, so Brooks asked him where Catherine was. He turned his head away, closed his eyes, and said that she was dead. And the hero, enraged, hit the prisoner in the face with his fist. The man, choking on blood, told him that he simply wanted to destroy Lorraine out of jealousy, so he told the Empress, and if they killed him now, they would never know where Catherine was. Brooks angrily told him to speak more respectfully and not to dare call his mother that. The prisoner began to scream desperately that he did not deserve such abuse, and asked Brooks if he would have been able to achieve his current position if he had not sold him to the Waldorfs. The guy was silent, and the man continued, telling him that he was now a marquis, but he could have spent his whole life in the shadows, and wouldn't it have been better not to stick his neck out once again? If he had acquired such a status, then why was he behaving so vilely? Brooks asked him with a smile what was so good about the title of Marquis, since it was not enough for him. The man looked at him questioningly, and he told him that he had always been looked down upon, and now he wanted to repay the debt and become a duke. And he added that this is not even the final goal. With such a title, he will be able to enter the fight for the throne, and everything may work out for him if there are no direct descendants left. The prisoner indignantly shouted at him that he had gone completely mad, that this was treason, and Brooks answered him that it was merely the legal order of succession to the throne. Servant Mason handed the sword to his master. Brooks took the sword and put it to the prisoner's throat, telling him that he was giving him one last chance. He asked him again where this traitor David was now. The prisoner remained silent, and then Brooks cut his throat slightly, but it drew blood immediately. And then the man spoke, told the Marquis that he was now in Albret, boarded a ship and headed for the port of Porcendo, and added that this was all he knew. Brooks gave the sword to Mason and ordered him to kill the prisoner. The man tried to stop him, but the Marquis had already left. The servant entered the master's room and told him that he had killed the prisoner, and said that he thought that the master himself would kill him. Brooks said he can't stand the smell of blood, and his wife has a similarly acute sense of smell. Mason asked the gentleman if it was true that he was going to take the throne. The hero replied that he was not sure yet. His whole life he had only tried to become better than others, in the hope that this would at least fill his heart a little. Mason asked what the master would do if this did not happen, and he asked him what would change if he took the throne. Brooks went to the window and said that he would become the head of Waldorf because he wanted to, but no one in this empire shared his opinion. Whether he became an emperor or a tyrant, he would still be overthrown. The servant turned to the master. Brooks looked at him and said that he was not destined to find happiness. Nothing would really change if he became the ruler, but he was not going to do nothing either. Otherwise, no one would even notice that he existed. Mason asked him if it would have been better for him if Waldorf had not saved him. Brooks said no. If it weren't for him, he would have been sold to some pervert, and he would have died. He has no other way out, only the promise to Chloe, which he holds on to. Here the gentleman suddenly decided to ask the servant for information about Tom Reacher. Mason said the dukedom originally belonged to his mother, Charlotte Richer, and after her death, the title passed to her husband, Tom, who was then 4 years old. Mason handed the papers with the information to the gentleman, who began to study them carefully, and said that he did not know about all this. Brooks read and saw a photo. Tom Reacher has a younger brother. Now he is 18 years old, and he is also not lacking in talent, so he can become the heir. The servant asked the master if he was thinking of changing the head of the Reacher family. He replied that he was thinking about it. While looking through the papers, he suddenly saw a photograph of a girl who looked very much like his wife, Claire. Mason said that this woman was Tom's mother. She was the previous duchess, and asked the gentleman if he noticed that she looked like Miss Claire. The gentleman objected, saying that his wife was 100 times more beautiful. Brooks looked at the photograph and thought about Claire and realized that now he understood why Tom Reacher was so attached to her. Gallaball, musician, plays the piano. All the guests of the evening gathered in beautiful and bright outfits. But among them stands little Claire, dressed in a simple gray dress, sadly. Someone called her. She turned around and saw Tom. He approached her and apologized for being late. Claire asked him if her dress looked strange. It was the one he chose. Tom said she looked very cute and modest clothes suited her perfectly. The girl did not answer. She looked around, and it seemed to her that all the people were whispering and laughing at her. She thought that despite everyone wearing fashionable dresses, she wanted to wear something simpler. She was embarrassed by the extra attention. But suddenly, the guy said that his mother liked such dresses, because his family is knightly, so he hates pretentious clothes, and paying so much attention to appearance is a stupid idea. Claire told him that loving beautiful things is not something bad. Tom told her that she was beautiful even in simple clothes. The girl blushed with embarrassment. The guy smiled at her, saying that it was true, and he suddenly asked if she could promise him that in the future she would only wear such things. She looked at him in surprise, and he added that she shouldn't wear fancy dresses. Simple ones suited her better. Claire wanted to say something in response, but she couldn't. She just thought that she didn't hate luxury. She just didn't want unnecessary attention. Tom told her that she was even more beautiful and asked about the promise. And the girl promised him that she would not wear fancy clothes in the future. He was very happy with her promise. And then everything around became not so bright, as if a cloud hung over her head. Tom looked at her angrily and said that she had broken her promise. Claire didn't understand what was happening, what he meant. Tom grabbed her by the throat and began to choke her. It was no longer a boy standing in front of her. It was already an adult and strong Tom. He was strangling her and asking why she married Lawrence and said that luxury did not suit her. Claire started to cry. She couldn't stop Tom. He didn't listen to her. He just continued, saying that she had promised and hadn't kept her word because he had told her to wear only simple things. He continued to choke and scream at her, said that he only loved Samantha, but married Claire because of her stubbornness, and now she dared to leave him and marry someone else. His voice echoed around the room as he told her she couldn't do this, and he promised to make her miserable. Suddenly his voice changed dramatically and he started shouting at her, come back to me!" And she shouted back at him, I don't want to!" And then she woke up, opened her eyes, and realized that it was a dream. Brooks sat next to her and asked if she was awake. She stood up and began to remember the dream. He asked what she had dreamed, if it was a nightmare by any chance, and apologized to her for not waking her up earlier. He put his hand on her shoulder and she replied that everything was fine. Suddenly, Brooks hugged her. Claire was very surprised and didn't know what to do. The guy continued to hug her and said that if she was against it, she could just push him away. But Claire didn't push him away but only smiled silently. Then she decided to tell him about the dream, said that Tom appeared in the dream, and he tried to strangle her and asked why she did not keep her promise. Everything looked so natural that she got scared. Brooks listened to her and said that she would have to do the same to him when they met. Claire objected, saying that it was just a nightmare. But the guy replied that even though it was a dream, she was in pain, and Tom committed a crime. Since there was no punishment for sleeping under the law, Brooks said, he would do it. But the girl interrupted him, asking if he was probably joking, and he replied that he might be joking. Brooks poured hot tea and offered it to Claire, telling her it would help calm her down. She thanked him and again recalled that terrible nightmare. But she felt much better already, and it was all thanks to Brooks, she thought. Claire finished her tea and she went to the window where he stood, and together they looked at the starry sky. The girl suddenly asked him not to destroy the rose garden. Brooks looked at her in surprise and said he thought she didn't like the garden. She smiled at him and said that she would try to love them. The girl thought about those beautiful roses in the garden and remembered Tom's words. He said that only modest things suited her, so she refused everything exquisite, but she might like pretentious things. Claire told Brooks that she avoided such things because she wasn't used to it. He told her that she shouldn't listen to that guy. True, thought Claire, and again remembered the dream in her past. Yes, she once promised Tom that she would not love anything luxurious and dress like that. But what's the point of keeping your word if he didn't keep it first? Tom was left alone, having lost that little Claire in her simple dress. Tom Reacher arrived at the Bronson mansion and was greeted joyfully by Samantha, who told him that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Has it really been that long? Tom asked her and came closer to her. He noticed that her dress was very similar to Claire's clothes. This was the first time Tom had seen her in such an outfit. Tom thought about it and remembered his ex-girlfriend, and came to the conclusion that it suited Claire better. Suddenly, Samantha asked him why he came. Maybe he wanted to see her sister. No, said Tom. And closing his eyes, he continued that he could no longer think about the fate of a man who, through stupidity, married someone he had not known for a month. The guy told Samantha that he came for another reason and suggested calling off the engagement. She couldn't believe it and asked why. He said that his head was in a mess lately and he needed to train more. Samantha had to tell him that she understood him. Tom had already started to leave, but turned around to look at her, and she said that they were in no hurry. It wasn't urgent anyway. That's right, Tom agreed and said that he was a little busy today, so he was leaving already. But suddenly Samantha grabbed his hand and tried to stop him and asked him to wait. She said that her mother would be back soon and asked him if he would like to meet her before leaving. Tom apologized and said that he had urgent business to attend to and therefore could not stay. He put his hand on her shoulder and kissed her cheek goodbye. Samantha froze and said nothing. And Tom left, and the girl only waved goodbye to him. As soon as he left the room, her face contorted in anger. She started crying, wiping away her tears. She started saying that she wouldn't even look at this trash if he wasn't from the Reacher family. But suddenly, someone came into her and shouted sternly at Samantha. It was her mother. She looked angrily at her daughter. She was very unhappy with what she heard. Mother told Samantha to come to her chambers. They needed to have a serious talk. Okay, Mother, the girl answered sadly. Lawrence's mansion, daylight has arrived and it's a beautiful sunny day outside. The main character opened her eyes and saw a maid standing next to the bed, and she asked the mistress how she slept and how her trip went. The heroine stood up and saw her longtime faithful servant Mia and was glad that she had transferred here. Mia smiled and said that she had been promised double her salary, and the lady laughed in response. Opening the curtains, the maid asked her mistress if she would like to have breakfast in the garden, as Mr. Lawrence had ordered. Claire wondered if having breakfast in the garden would give off too much of a scent from the flowers. The maid looked out the window and said that they would have to cook something simple, and added that the weather was so beautiful outside. "How about enjoying the view?" Ms. Mia asked. Claire thought about it. She had now decided to try such things. The girl decided to do as Brooks said and agreed to go to the garden for breakfast. The garden was simply charming. Red, pink, and even blue roses grew in it. Butterflies were flying everywhere, and in the middle of the garden there was a decorated table with various dishes and snacks. Claire couldn't take her eyes off all this beauty. Then she turned to Brooks and said she thought there would be a strong smell, but she couldn't smell anything. "It's magic," the guy answered with a smile, and then she asked if that was possible. Brooks looked at her and said it would be easier to answer, which was impossible for him. The girl noticed that she was being modest, and the guy laughed and said how smart she was. For breakfast, she was brought a sandwich decorated with flowers and leaves. Claire stared at the plate and asked Brooks what kind of sandwich it was. The presentation was a little odd. Brooks said with a smile that it was a beautiful, fancy sandwich, as she had said the day before, and he tried to decorate it. "Did you make it yourself?" Claire asked him and decided to try a piece. As soon as she tried it, she realized how delicious it was and told Brooks that he was a great cook. The hero laughed and said thank you for the compliment, but the chef cooked it and he just decorated it. Claire put on a stern face and said that she was taking her words back, which made Brooks feel touched. The girl finished her sandwich, drank tea, and enjoyed the beautiful view. Then suddenly Brooks asked her what she thought about learning magic. The heroine hesitated and replied that she wouldn't say that she wasn't interested, she just lacked confidence because there was nothing she was good at, and she wondered if she would succeed. Brooks told her that if she was interested, she could challenge herself, and it didn't have to be magic. She could choose horseback riding, painting, dancing, anything. And Claire, having listened to him and thought everything over, agreed. Then he got up from the table and told her that they could try it now. "How is it now?" Claire asked, but the guy told her to listen carefully. Brooks started with a short digression, saying that each person has their own attribute, and it is based on talent. People have the ability to move objects like water, and that the earth is a magical molecule. When he finished, he asked Claire if she understood everything. She was a little confused and said that her confidence had disappeared somewhere and asked him to give up the idea. The guy just laughed and said that he was asking for forgiveness. He made it difficult on purpose because she was very cute when she was confused. "Let's keep it simple," Brooks said. "There's more to it than talent. The trick is to translate image into form." Brooks raised his hand and a glow appeared, followed by various white and blue figures. Claire looked in amazement at the magic that was happening now. But the guy said he would show you another way. It's more like creating a template that transforms the form. This is often called the power of the spirit. "Strength of spirit," the girl repeated, looking at him in fascination. "It's not hard to control," Brooks continued, "if you have a little imagination, but you need certain emotions to release it." Then he took an artifact from the box that looked like a pocket watch. "What emotions are needed?" Claire asked. He replied that these must be strong and negative emotions. It is much more difficult for happy people. "Try it once," Brooks said, handing her the watch. Claire reached out and touched the clock. The hands began to move at a furious speed. She looked at the guy and asked him if he thought she could do it. "Everyone has their own problems," Brooks said. The girl whispered her problems, and having made up her mind, touched the watch again. There was a small, bright flash. The guy noticed what a strong reaction was happening to the mana. "That's a good sign," Brooks said, and decided to add a little of his own. He touched Claire's hand and took the mana into his hands. The flash became even brighter. Suddenly, the girl felt something and told Brooks about it, and asked if this was the special feeling he was talking about. Suddenly, some kind of matter consisting of water was formed. Claire was delighted and shouted that it worked. "Yes," Brooks said, "it's the spirit of water. I didn't think it would be so easy." Then he told her to imagine some form, a tree, a person, anything but concrete. Otherwise, he would soon disappear. The girl frantically began to remember what she could imagine associated with the lake, the sea, and remembered about the dolphin. Immediately, the matter turned into a dolphin and seemed to jump out of the water. Claire did it, and then Brooks told her to come up with a name for him. She thought for a long time about what to name this dolphin, and the name Vaudin came to her mind. As soon as she said the name out loud, the dolphin jumped, spun around, and became even clearer than before. Claire looked at him with admiration. As he suddenly disappeared into thin air, Brooks told Claire that he would appear when she called his name. He congratulated her and praised her, saying that it was a great honor to meet a spirit for the first time. But suddenly the girl felt ill and began to lose consciousness. The hero was very scared for Claire and hugged her so that she would not fall. The girl thanked him for his concern, and Brooks said that summoning a spirit takes a lot of energy, and it is better to rest, and offered to take her there. Claire smiled at him and said that she could go herself or just call the servants. Brooks objected, saying how could he trust his wife to a servant and that he might get jealous. "Hold on tight," said the guy, and carried her in his arms. The heroine became embarrassed and ordered him to let her go. He smiled at her and said that he would never tire of admiring her embarrassed face. As they walked, she said that he had very strange hobbies and asked if it was because of his character that no one wanted to meet him before her. He only answered that it might be so. Brooks thought about the spirit that Claire had summoned and pondered. Summoning a spirit requires a certain clear emotion. Fire is fear, wind is rage, earth means loneliness, and water is what predominates in Claire. It is despair. Brooks sat in his office building a house of cards. Then his assistant Will came to him and reminded him about his wife Claire's birthday, that it was in January, and the gentleman had not ordered a gift. Brooks didn't seem to be listening to him. He was thinking about something and holding his finger on the very top of the house. "You haven't forgotten about him?" Will asked. And immediately the hero destroys the house of cards. The assistant asked the gentleman if he had told her about his birthday. He replied that she didn't need to worry about it. Others sent him a lot of gifts anyway. But then Brooks said that wasn't the issue right now and asked Will what he thought of his relationship with Claire. The assistant thought for a moment and said that the gentleman had become sentimental and even a little crazy, and he added that he became a man who madly loves his wife. Brooks reflected on how he had become so loving. Will said that the wedding had already taken place, and he no longer needed to pretend. And what the lady would think if he continued to take such good care of her. She might feel special. The gentleman asked the assistant if he was telling Brooks to be more cool. The hero began to think, if he suddenly changes his attitude, how will she react? First be surprised, then close her heart. And it will be simply to carry out the duties of the marquise, and their relationship will never be the same as it is now. They will have a dull married life, and will only say hello and goodbye. And if Claire becomes like this, she will never call him by his name or smile at him again. "No way," Brooks said suddenly and stood up from the table. The assistant asked the gentleman what he had decided. The hero walked up to the window and said that he had never met anyone with such a gentle character. Claire was walking in the garden with the maids, and Brooks watched her and said how stingy she was with her emotions, and that made her seem a little cruel. But he constantly sees the despair that she hides so well. And every time he has obsessive thoughts about grabbing her and hugging and kissing her tightly. "That's not like me at all," Brooks said. The assistant agreed with him and said it was surprising that the very same devil of the battlefield was capable of such a thing, because his allies were terrified at his mere glance. Brooks looked sternly at Will and asked if he often spoke ill of him like that, and the assistant was a little frightened by his own words and apologized to him. Will then went on to tell his master that he knew he didn't want to admit it, but he better stop running away because he's been looking like he's been in love for a long time now. At this time, Claire returned to her room and trained with the spirit Vaudin. She ordered him to put out the candle, and Vaudin, spinning around, did it in 1 second. The girl praised him, and the spirit evaporated into thin air. She sat down on the sofa and felt her strength drain away, and noticed that even a short summoning of the spirit took so much strength. Claire thought about Brooks's words, how he said that it took a lot of concentration and endurance, but for now this was her limit. Lost in thought, she suddenly remembered that he had never told her what feeling was required to summon Vaudin. She thought about Brooks, how the first time he had made a completely different impression on her, the one who was supposed to kill her. Before returning to the past, Tom stood and watched as Brooks and the coffin that Claire lay in disappeared. Grand Duke Brooks Lawrence took Claire's body. Tom shouted and said that he had to find it no matter what it took. The guards approached the gentleman and told him that they would catch him. Brooks headed to Devil's Mountain. But Tom ordered the guards to keep the second-level soldiers and below here in the castle, and the first-level special forces would go with him. On Devil's Mountain, Brooks stood over the coffin and cast a spell, and magical runes began to appear around it. He was casting a spell when his servant Mason, who was standing nearby, told him that it was impossible. There was no way to go back in time. But Brooks didn't listen to him and said that he promised Chloe and that he shouldn't even try to stop him. The servant objected, saying that the promise was made in jest, and that Claire's mother was only a distant relative of Mrs. Chloe's, and that they had never even met. So how could the promise concern one with whom they were merely of the same blood? Brooks told him to keep quiet if he didn't understand how Claire was a priest with a promise. "It's too big a sacrifice," Mason said with annoyance. Then Mr. Will's assistant came into their cave and, watching them, he thought how Mason didn't understand him. As soon as Mason tried to stop the gentleman again, Will intervened in the conversation and said that his promise stated that if she chose her own path, then she should not interfere with it. Brooks turned to him and asked what he was doing there. Will replied that he had not come to stop him since he would not listen to him anyway. The assistant said he had come to report that Tom Reacher had begun to act. Then he continued that it was not a problem if you turned back time, but it was a mistake not to cover your tracks. Servant Mason began to beg his master on his knees to stop immediately and not rush into a decision. Did he really want to give up everything he had achieved in 10 years? As Brooks said, he was angry at first about the failures, but starting over isn't so bad. The master told the servant that he knows how devoted he is to Chloe because she once saved him from slavery, and this is probably the reason why he helps him, the successor. And he added that even Chloe Valverde didn't know that their promise was a magical contract, according to which he would not let Claire meet such a terrible end. "How could you act so recklessly?" Mason asked him, "since breaking the contract means death." "But I'm not dead," Brooks said. "There is a way back, so he is still alive, and if he weren't there, this situation wouldn't even exist." He continued by saying that he felt no sense of satisfaction after becoming either a marquis or a duke, and that this void could not be filled even by receiving the throne. "So it's best to leave it at that," Brooks said, and continued to conjure with the time portal. Will said goodbye to the gentleman, telling him that they would soon see each other in the past. As soon as the red flash began to appear, the guards arrived with Tom. Brooks sat closer to Claire and glanced at Tom, who was shouting at the guards to stop him immediately. But it was too late. Tom was already approaching the coffin when everything burst into flames, a flash, and they disappeared. And just like that, the clock hands turned back. Brooks Chase, a child born under the witch moon, on the day of the most powerful magic in the year 1000. A child born on a witch's day is usually weak and dies quickly, but this boy was different from others. A true demon was born among humans. Even the curse of the witch's moon is nothing to him. He brought with him a powerful, fateful, and dangerous force. There is no one in the world who could threaten his life. Brooks thought that he didn't have the strength left for a second return to the past. Even if everything went well, he wouldn't have any memory of it, even though the spell was his. The memory will remain with Claire, as will the choice of which path to take when she returns. Present day, Claire and Brooks are having breakfast, and he asks her about the tea party, what she said. "Yes, there's a party today," said the heroine. The girl said she wanted to try it since it was free, and the event was being organized by Viscountess Leona Woods. Brooks said the Woods family is small, neither aristocratic nor common. This is how Claire answered, and added that she had received many invitations. But she did not know where to go, so she decided that a tea party would be quite suitable. The hero agreed with her and asked her if she always dressed like that. The girl was surprised by his question and asked if she really looked strange. "No," Brooks said with a smile, "a little extra flair wouldn't hurt." And as soon as he snapped his fingers, her image began to change as if by magic. Oh, miracle! Her dress became so beautiful and luxurious the heroine gasped in amazement. Now Brooks put the finishing touches and conjured up a huge and luxurious necklace for her. He looked at her in amazement and said that she was still beautiful, but now also stunning. It suited her very well. "You're so talented," said Claire, and asked if he liked this style. The guy replied that this one was better than the previous one and smiled at her. Brooks extended his hand to her and said that he had business at the palace and that he would take her to Christopher Woods on the way. Claire looked at him questioningly, and he said, "Let's show people how close we are. This will be our first public appearance together." She agreed and extended her hand, saying that this was one of her duties as a marchioness. It wasn't just because of that, Brooks said, but she didn't hear it. And when she asked again, he said nothing. "Let's go." They arrived at Christopher Woods' castle. Claire was met by two girls, Leona Woods and Charlotte Spring. "My God, come in, Lady Bronson," said Charlotte. Claire looked at her and she replied, "Or should you be called Lady Lawrence?" The heroine said that she didn't think she would meet Charlotte here. She replied that she was here on business, and also didn't think she would see her. "You look gorgeous today," Charlotte said. "Before marriage you dressed like a widow. Where did such a change come from?" Claire was puzzled, but the girl still didn't calm down and said, "Did your rich husband really cheat on you that much?" Two more girls came up to them, and then Charlotte said that she was only joking because the Bronson family never had to complain about finances, and laughed. The main character thought to herself that if she had known that Charlotte would be here, she would not have come. Charlotte Spring, a prominent member of the conservative faction, was declared the heir to the Marquis of Spring. Claire doesn't understand why she has been targeting her ever since, or if it's because she's from a ducal family, and Charlotte despises her for her lack of talent. They entered the hall where there was a table with various desserts. "How wonderful to see you in good health." Emily Smith greeted the heroine and said that she had been worried because there had been some unflattering rumors. Claire wondered what rumors she was talking about. Betty Banks intervened in the conversation and asked if she didn't know that the Marquis Lawrence had never had relations with girls, and Emily continued by saying that many people here had been rejected by him. Charlotte then said that everyone was talking about the Marquis being very close to his assistant Will. She had heard that they had always lived together and were close. "What a shame," said one of the girls, and they began to whisper to each other. Claire said if they wanted to say that Brooks Lawrence prefers men. "We're just discussing rumors," Charlotte said, "and he probably wouldn't get married if it were true." She went on to say that Claire Bronson had chosen him herself, rejecting Tom Reacher. "Although he might take a lover," Charlotte said, and everyone laughed. Claire pretended not to be offended by Charlotte's words. The girl then turned to Claire and said that she had exaggerated a little, and asked if she would tell all this to her husband. "Miss Sring was just kidding," one of the girls said. Claire looked at them and thought that of course she would tell her husband everything. "Then I decided to tell them that they were making fun of the Marquis, and it looked more like an invasion of privacy, so maybe it made sense to file a lawsuit." Charlotte got angry and got up from the table. Claire looked at her and thought how she usually kept herself in check before, but today she crossed the line. Maybe it was because he was of noble birth. Charlotte started screaming that she was just telling rumors, and what did he expect if he had never even kissed the girl? The heroine looked at her and said that she should know her limits, then added that she was leaving here. She had nothing more to discuss with them. As soon as Claire stood up and started to leave, Charlotte shouted to her that the Spring family would not be afraid of an aristocrat from commoners. The heroine turned to her and asked if her father was as brave as she was. Charlotte was furious, but Emily interrupted them and said wouldn't they become enemies if they went to court? Claire just looked at them silently. And then Emily takes a cup of hot tea, saying, "You forgot something. Take the tea with you," and splashes it right in Claire's face. The girl closes her eyes and something unexpected happens. Tea spills on Charlotte. Everyone looks at Charlotte in horror. The main character opens her eyes and does not understand anything. And then her spirit, Vaudin, appears. She smiles at him and thanks him for his help. The girls help Charlotte dry herself off, and she looks at Claire with hatred. She then tearfully says that Marquis Lawrence apparently protects his bride so much that he even gave her an artifact. "Apparently the tea wasn't meant for me," Claire said, and thought about Charlotte's words. The artifact, she was talking about Vaudin. She took it for the artifact's effect. It seems that spirits are a rare phenomenon. Charlotte said angrily that she would not let it go that easily. Claire told her that she would also remember how Charlotte treated her. They looked at each other with hatred. Charlotte then turned around and shouted to her friends that they were leaving already. Leona Woods was horrified by what had happened to her tea party. "I'll go too," said Claire Leone, and thanked her. She replied that she should take care of herself and ordered that the Marquise be escorted home. The servant and 2 castle attendants stood and waited for the Marquise. The servant asked to follow him. One of the attendants glanced at Claire and stared at her. When she had already come out and was about to leave, she was stopped. It was the castle servant who was looking at her. He caught up with them out of breath and asked them to wait a little. After apologizing to her, he introduced himself as Ellis Engels. The servant who was seeing the lady off suddenly said what was wrong with this guy. And when Ellis replied that she was actually a girl, the servant suddenly thought that she looked more like a guy. Claire said she was glad to meet her and asked what she wanted. Ellis asked her if she had just used magic. She had just been interested in it since she was a child. She asked the lady to stay and talk to her a little. Claire invited her to her home to show her more. The girl sat down on the sofa as usual, opened her hand and said the name Vaudin, and he immediately appeared. Ellis watched in awe as the magic that was now happening before her eyes. "This is Vaudin, the spirit of water," said the heroine. Ellis was very happy to see a water spirit for the first time. Claire continued that the most he could do now was put out the candles. "And what about protection from tea?" Ellis suddenly asked, and Claire definitely agreed. They sat and watched as Vaudin circled above their heads. "I don't know how to make it stronger," Claire said. "They say they are capable of even high-level magic, and they don't grow without reason." Ellis thought for a moment and suggested that she take part in a hunting competition in February. The Ramon Forest would be opened by the royal family. The heroine, surprised by the offer, said that she was not a knight and had never done such a thing. Ellis laughed and said that you don't have to be a knight. Anyone can participate. "If you participate in the competition," she said, "I will come every day and support you." Claire asked what about her personal time then. Ellis hastened to reassure the lady that she was a free knight, so there were no restrictions. She also said that she had an official status, but stupid rumors started, and that's it. Claire asked about the rumors, and Ellis said that because of her appearance, she's popular with girls, they mistake her for a man, and when the truth is revealed, they disappear. Claire laughed at her crazy story. At this time, Mr. Brooks Lawrence had already arrived at the castle. He went into the hall and asked the servants if his wife had returned. One of the employees said that she returned early and not alone, but with a guest, and now they are in the living room. Brooks, hearing this, turned to him and asked what other guest he had. The servant described the guest as a handsome knight and added that he had not seen a uniform look so good on someone for a long time. Brooks, heading to the living room, thought about the servant's words, handsome, looks good in uniform, and frowned. When he entered the living room, he saw the two of them sitting and talking about something. Brooks came up behind Claire, put his hand on her right shoulder, and whispered in her ear that it was not nice to have an affair in front of everyone. The heroine did not expect him to appear so suddenly. Brooks looked deep into the handsome knight's eyes. Claire told him it was actually a girl, and she laughed. "This always happens to me," she said, and they laughed together. Then she stood up and said that her name was Ellis Engels, and that this was her first meeting with the Marquis. Hearing the name, Brooks remembered the prisoner Count Engels, who had recently been killed by his servant in prison. That evening, Claire and Brooks sat drinking wine and discussing the upcoming competition. She said the hunting convention was too much for her, but Brooks countered by saying the views of Ramona Forest were spectacular and she wouldn't regret it. "I thought you would be against it," said the heroine, "because it's less than 2 months away." He smiled at her and said that he preferred rabbits and squirrels. And he added that in return he would prepare a handkerchief for her. She looked at him in surprise. Claire finally replied that she wasn't sure she could catch anyone, but she would try. Then she decided to tell about the situation at the tea party, how she heard a nasty rumor about him, and maybe he should take action. What rumor did Brooks ask her about? She said it was about his sexual orientation. There was an awkward silence, and Claire asked if he was angry. He closed his eyes and said he wasn't angry, just a little shocked. "What did you tell them?" Brooks asked her. "She said you don't look gay," Claire blurted out. Brooks asked why she said he didn't look like him, and she replied that she wouldn't say anything she wasn't sure about. The hero looked at her and said that he didn't expect that she would believe in such a thing. Then he took her by the chin and pulled her towards him and said, "That means I need to prove it to you," and smiled at her. She tried to object to the guy but didn't have time. The guy pulled the girl closer to him and kissed her passionately. They kissed for a long time. The hero moaned with pleasure. After the kiss, Claire blushed and told him why he did it. Brooks touched his lips and asked her if she now understood what his orientation was. The girl closed her eyes and said that she already knew that he was not gay, and she added that it was not necessary to do this. Words would have been enough for her. Then Claire told him not to force himself to prove something to her. Brooks was upset by this and wondered who she took him for. There was no trust in him. He told her that he wasn't forcing himself, that even the thought of kissing Will made him sick. And at that moment, Will walked in and heard everything. Will could only stammer out an apology to them. Claire began to worry about Will, that he might have misunderstood something. Brooks and the girl were standing on the balcony, and she decided to ask what kind of relationship they had with Will, and the hero thought that she was making fun of him. The boy turned to his assistant and told him not to let him see him until he calmed down. "And keep your mouth shut," Brooks told Will, who sat down on the floor and began to sob. Then, taking the folder in his hand, he told the assistant to act according to the plan. They cannot be allowed to tell Claire such things about their relationship with him. Will asked again about our relationship, looking up at the gentleman. Brooks got angry and told him to stop repeating it or he was going to shoot himself. "Let's get to the bottom of this," Brooks said, studying the papers where the Charlotte Spring case was. "Even if it damages the reputation, we can't let this go." After examining the papers, the gentleman asked Will why he had come. The assistant handed him the papers and said that it was a report on Catherine. Will reported that a woman with ash hair similar to her was seen in the port of Laredo. She was followed in several villages, but lost in Abbeville. It looks like she returned to Solaris. Brooks asked her if she had returned to this country and what she wanted, to lie low or change her identity. The hero continued to think that this was not the case. She was not that smart. He then turned to his assistant and ordered him to send all the scouts to Solaris to find her, and that no one should know the identity of the informant. And he asked if they had dealt with Count Engels. Will said they disguised it as a suicide. It would be impossible to identify. There shouldn't be any problems. Brooks began to remember today's guest, Ellis, and wondered if there would be any problems. The hero asked his assistant if he knew who had come to the castle today. "Yes," said the assistant, "I know that Ellis Engels came. The Count cut off all ties with his children." Brooks asked Will what he thought of her. He replied that she happened to attend the same event as the lady, and it was all childish admiration for magic, so she decided to get closer to Claire. The hero asked his assistant with a smile if he really thought it was a coincidence. Will said he had heard Ellis visiting the woods before, so it seemed true. Brooks said well and ordered him to provide the results within 2 days. Then turning to Will, he asked if it was true that Ellis was a woman and not a man. The assistant said the truth and asked him why he was asking this. Brooks looked at him questioningly. Will started saying that he knows what a perfectionist Mr. is, but sometimes he goes too far. It's jealousy, and he even kissed her and said that he's afraid rumors will start if someone notices. "What do you want to say?" Lawrence asked him. The assistant asked the gentleman if he loved her. Brooks turned away and told him not to make anything up. "I feel the same way about her as I do about Dumbledore. Everything will end when the time comes." Will smiled and said that he didn't know that the gentleman wanted to kiss Dumbledore. The hero looked angrily at his assistant, and he regretted what he had just said. The next day, Ellis Engels came to visit Claire again. The main character greeted her with a smile and thanked her for her visit. Ellis thanked the girl in return for the invitation, and Claire politely told her to follow her into the living room. They sat down to drink tea, and Claire told her that she had decided to take part in the hunt, but was a little worried because she didn't know what to do, and so would be glad to receive any advice from her. Ellis said she enjoyed talking to her and figured it would come in handy, so she brought it. "What did you bring?" the girl asked her. She took out 2 large books and placed them on the table in front of the lady. Ellis suggested starting with the basics and said that she took 2 of the most famous books on spiritual magic. The girl thanked her for the books and noticed how thick they were. Ellis said that she was very interested in magic, so no one would suspect anything, and told the lady not to worry about rumors. At his estate, the Duke of Alta sat on a stepladder and tended to the flowers in the garden by cutting stems. Tom Reacher approached him and asked if his father had invited him to his place. The Duke asked about the engagement and said he had heard it had been postponed. "Yes," said Tom, "it's all because of my training." The Duke raised his voice and told him not to make excuses for drinking alcohol every day during training. "What are you unhappy with, Father? You didn't even have any competitors," and asked why he changed his mind because he was worried about the other one refusing. The Duke reminded him that he had sworn an oath once, and he did not intend to wait long. He had no business with this family after the death of his mother. The Duke said that he wanted to get rid of the position of head as quickly as possible, and if Tom did not have the necessary qualities, he would not get the position. And he added, looking into Tom's eyes, that he would never hand over the title to a useless man who couldn't even handle his own family's affairs. "Did you understand me?" the Duke asked Tom, and the boy answered. Afterwards, his father told him that he had until April, and he had to marry Samantha Bronson. "No more delays," Tom objected, saying that it was his business. "No," said the Duke, "this is a matter for the entire Reacher family. If you fail, the title will go to your brother." Tom banged his fist on the wall and became very angry. A butler passed by and asked if the young master was all right. Tom said he just had a headache. The guy said that he has been suffering from nightmares lately. He dreams of Claire and how Brooks takes her body. Lawrence's estate, Brooks introduces Claire to his servant Mason. They exchange pleasantries, Claire telling her husband that she thought that Will was the only one helping the Marcus. Brooks replied that Mason was a little shy around strangers, so he decided to introduce them later. He then said that from that day on, Mason would teach her the basics of spiritual magic. including hunting tricks. And he added that Ellis could stop wasting his time. Claire agreed and said that it was his estate, and she shouldn't have invited a guest without warning. The hero replied that that wasn't why he decided so. The girl stood in the middle of the room and called Voden, while Mason watched everything. Mason said that Voden is still small. He's in the infancy stage. Usually these spirits develop quickly. And he continued that his body was too small, and that when hunting, she would have to use tricks rather than hit him head-on. Claire asked what tricks. He answered that, for example, you need to cover your head with water and suffocate, or block your vision. There are quite a few effective methods. The girl said that it was very cruel, and Mason answered that hunting is hunting. There is no other way. Claire hung her head, and Mason asked her if something was wrong. She replied that she had never hunted. The girl said that she needed to practice more. She continued to cast spells with Voden, and Mason advised her to direct the energy to her fingertips and concentrate. Mason, looking at Claire, began to remember Miss Chloe, and he said to himself why she decided to take care of her. You seem to be a little distracted. Take a rest, said Mason. She looked at him with a smile and said okay. Suddenly, the servant decided to ask her if she knew Madame Chloe Waldorf. Claire was surprised and said that her mother's maiden name was Waldorf. Before marriage, her name was Angelina Waldorf. The servant listened to her attentively. She said that after marriage, she did not communicate much with her family, so she hardly knows anyone. Mason thought that Angelina Waldorf was most likely Miss Chloe's cousin, and so if Claire was her daughter, then she was Chloe's fifth cousin. So strangely, thought the servant, Miss Chloe had not even met Claire. So what was her interest then? Claire asked the servant why he was interested. He replied that he thought they looked alike and apologized to the lady. Then the servant suggested that she take a break and have some tea. After drinking tea, Claire said that she was very tired, and the servant said that summoning a spirit requires a lot of energy, but her efforts paid off. She summoned Voden again, and to the heroine's surprise, he became even bigger than before. Now you better rest and I'll go, said Mason. Claire thanked him for his help and sat down more comfortably. The girl began to fall asleep right on the sofa. She was very tired and thought to herself that she needed to go to her room. Suddenly, through her sleep, she felt as if her body was being moved. Claire opened her eyes to see Brooks carrying her into the room. He smiled and apologized to her, saying that he didn't want to wake her up, but just move her to the room. Did you sleep well? Brooks asked her. She replied that he could have just woken her up. Brooks laughed and asked if she remembered what he said a couple of days ago about fulfilling his wishes. How about today? Her hero asked with a smile. She looked at him pitifully. She said that she would need to pay for his help in studying and asked what he would ask for. Brooks replied that she could choose from several options offered. Two maids held dresses in their hands. One was simple and the other luxurious. Choose, Brooks told her, but the girl didn't know which dress she wanted. The hero decided to help and told her that red looked chic and asked if she agreed with it. The girl agreed with him and said that the second dress looked too simple. Brooks said with a smile that she used to like dresses like that, and he thought her opinion had changed, and he added that he was very glad that she had gotten used to such things. The girl settled on a red dress and tried it on. She looked at herself in the mirror and gasped in amazement, and thought that it looked good on her. Brooks couldn't take his eyes off his wife, and said that the dress suited her very well. The girl smiled at him and thanked him for the compliment. Then let's go, said Brooks, and taking her arm, they went into the living room for dinner. There were 2 tables in the living room, and on them were various dishes, ranging from steak, mushroom soup, and salad to spaghetti bolognese. The girl looked at all these dishes in surprise and asked what she needed to choose for the table. I'll choose this one, Claire said and walked over to the white table. Brooks snapped his fingers and suddenly the table disappeared, and she found herself at the red table. The girl looked at what was happening in surprise, and the hero told her that she didn't have to choose. She asked him where the table had disappeared to. Was it really a teleportation to the mountains again? Brooks told the girl that this was the servants' dining table and asked Dumbula to confirm his words. The heroine enjoyed every bite of food, and her husband watched her furtively. Do you like it? Brooks asked her. She agreed and said that today it tasted better than usual, very exquisite. Suddenly, the hero said that the third time the conditions were the same, the hall of the estate or the citadel, he asked her. She said it was a pointless question and asked what he was going to do. After thinking for a bit, the girl said that she would choose the hall. As you wish, Brooks told her and bowed before her. The hero raised his hand above his head and a large portal immediately formed. In an instant, everything around them changed and they moved into some kind of hall. Claire was again very surprised and amazed at how quickly they teleported. And then Brooks extended his hand to her and asked if he could ask her to dance. The girl didn't know what to answer and said that she danced very badly. "Well, it's not necessary," said the hero. "Just enjoy and follow my movements. Let's dance together." He said that if she didn't want to, she could refuse, but she said that everything was fine and asked him not to move too fast. "It's a great honor for me," Brooks said and took her hand. The music began to slow down, and the girl thought that it was probably his magic again. "This is the first time I've danced such a slow waltz," the girl said, and he answered that this melody was specially made for her and asked if she liked it. She answered, of course, and smiled. Then she asked him if she could try a different melody, and he replied that he wanted to dance to this one. Just like at our first meeting, the guy suddenly said, right after the revival, Claire called off the engagement with Tom. She doesn't know why. Maybe she wanted to see the one who will kill her in the future. By the way, you noticed that at your request, I very quickly made the second part for you. Love you. Don't forget to subscribe and leave your kind message to me in the comments under this video. That's why she attended the ball in the Capitol. And there she first met Brooks Lawrence. Their eyes met. The hero approached her and invited the girl to dance. "Dance with me," Brooks said, holding out his hand to the heroine. Claire looked around at everyone. Everyone was dancing, having fun, and she agreed. They danced together, and the guy told her that they hadn't met yet and introduced himself as Brooks Lawrence. The girl lowered her head and said sadly, "I'm Claire Bronson, by the way, my favorite YouTube viewer. If you subscribe to my channel, you will be the best subscriber and viewer." Then she told him that he had chosen a dance as a reward for his services to His Majesty, and she had not expected that he would choose her. "But you don't look surprised at all," Brooks said. "Not at all, it was unexpected," the heroine replied. The girl asked what Brooks wanted to talk to her about. He said he heard she had broken off her engagement to Sir Tom Reacher. The heroine only answered him that she liked Tom, because the Marquis had asked her that in the past. Brooks then asked her if she was always so sharp with her words. Claire didn't answer and just turned away, and then he asked if maybe she didn't like it. The girl removed her hand and asked him why he invited her to dance, just to tease her. Then the heroine looked at him intently and said that she knew a lot, even more than he thought. Brooks didn't understand what she wanted to say, and the girl simply turned away and said that the music had already ended. They bowed politely to each other. Claire immediately said that she had to go, and Brooks just stared after her in silence. When the girl left, he looked at his hand with puzzlement and thought about something. The heroine went out onto the balcony and sighed with relief. What was he thinking? She said to herself. Then Tom came to her and asked if everything was okay with her. She turned to him and he asked her what the Marquis had talked to her about. "Nothing important," the girl answered and asked where Samantha was now. Tom replied that Duke Reacher was accompanying her and that Tom was Claire's partner today. She looked at him and wanted to say something. Then she turned away and decided to say that he would do better to take care of his bride. The guy was surprised by her words and asked why she was behaving like that. The heroine listened to him, he continued, saying that she suddenly drew a line between them and the breakup of the engagement did not cancel their friendship. Claire finally said that things were different now. Their relationship would not be the same as when she loved him. "Listen to Claire," he said, and grabbed her hand, but she pulled it away. And she told him not to touch her and to leave immediately before she called someone. Tom was just about to say something to her when someone walked in, and they both turned around and saw him. It was the Marquis Lawrence, who came in and asked with a grin if he was disturbing them. "No, we're already done," Claire said with a sigh. Tom wanted to say something to the girl again when Brooks interrupted him and called him. He turned to him, and the Marquis said that the girl had told him to leave. Their conversation was over. Tom Reacher angrily walked away from them, slamming the door. "I arrived on time, yes?" asked the girl, Brooks Lawrence. "That's right," she answered, and asked why he came to tell her something. The hero answered her that he simply wanted to finish their previous conversation. He then said that she looked tired, so they would meet later, and asking for forgiveness, he bowed before her. As Brooks was about to leave, the girl stopped him, and she asked him if he would propose to her. The hero looked at her and said that she could guess that he wanted to climb very high, and the wedding was just a way to achieve this. She said that she would not be showing up for the holidays anytime soon, and if he intended to do something, it would be better now. "If so," said the hero, and came closer to the heroine and asked if she would agree to marry him. The girl looked into his eyes. Brooks waited for her answer, and she decided to kiss him. He in turn did not expect this. "Yes, I agree," said Claire, and ran away. They continued to dance and twirl to this beautiful melody. The girl suddenly asked why he invited her to dance. "Remember when the ball started, we made eye contact," Brooke said. Claire asked him with her eyes and recalled their first meeting. Claire suddenly thought that he had looked at her that way too. Brooke said her eyes were blank and her face expressionless, like a ceramic doll. And he said with a smile that he wanted to break this mask then, only out of good intentions. The heroine looked at him with admiration and said that now it did not look like a mistake. They continued dancing, and she said that there were rumors that he wanted to invite His Majesty to dance, by the way. "My favorite YouTube viewer. If you subscribe to my channel, you will be the best subscriber and viewer." "There are so many different fables, I'll sort them out later," Brooke said with displeasure, and she laughed at him in response. By the way, his heroine asked him about the latest rumor. He replied that he had already filed a complaint. Brooke said the same thing and almost kissed his wife. And he continued that it was no longer so important, and the girl laughed. Claire laughed and said that she thought he would kiss her. He asked her what was tempting him. The heroine suddenly said that she had long ago remembered the look in his eyes when he joked. Brooks wondered what it meant she was watching him. "Ah, the melody is over," said the girl and raised her head. She looked at him with a smile and thought to herself that it seemed to her that the melody would never stop. And then the hero told her that the next choice was the Rose Garden or the Empress's Secret Garden and asked what she would choose. She looked at him and asked what he would do if he chose the Empress's Garden. He said that they would sneak in there, and if anyone noticed them, he would erase their memory. The girl said that there was no need for that. She liked the Rose Garden. "Then," Brooks said, snapping his fingers, and a portal immediately appeared above their heads. The hall instantly changed into a rose garden, where there was already a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She looked at the garden with admiration and said that no matter how many times she saw it, she still could not get used to either the garden or the magic. He smiled and said that she would gradually get used to it and invited her into the gazebo. They drank wine and enjoyed the evening. Brooks suddenly said that it was already midnight and looked at Claire mysteriously. She did not understand anything. And suddenly he takes out a beautiful white rose with a beautiful bow and hands it to her. "Happy birthday to Claire," Brooks said and gave her a rose. The girl just opened her mouth and could not say anything due to surprise. Brooks continued and said he was very glad she was born and congratulated her again. The heroine accepted the rose and thanked him. Claire reflected that she had never had such a wonderful birthday. Then she told him with a smile that now it was his turn to choose. The hero looked at her questioningly, and she said, "Choose whether to kiss you or you will kiss me yourself." He was a little taken aback by her words, but the girl laughed and said that she would choose herself. Before Brooks could say anything, she had already kissed him. He hugged Claire tightly and kissed her back. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and lowered her head onto his chest. He hugged her and kissed her on the forehead. The guy thought that he seemed to be in love just a little. The next day, we are transported to the mansion of the Marquis of Spring. The Marquis of Spring tells Charlotte that the Marquis of Lawrence has sued several people for slander and insult, some of whom are already under investigation. "You must understand your situation so as not to get into trouble," said Marquis Spring. Charlotte didn't answer and just snorted in displeasure. He said that he didn't care what she did in the past, but this time she crossed the line and ordered her to apologize to Marquis Lawrence. The girl became indignant and began to shout that these were just petty accusations and that they were able to refute them. "Let everyone think that we cannot resist him," said Marquis Spring. And with a smile on his face, he said that this was only for now. He continued by saying that thanks to him, the dream of becoming a ducal family would come true. It was never too late to kill. Charlotte asked him if they would get rid of him when he became useless. Marquis Spring said that even the Emperor could not do anything. The girl calmed down and said that she would write something similar to a letter of apology. Marquis Spring suddenly told her to stop communicating with Emily Smith. "Your relationship is nothing but unpleasantness," the Marquise continued, "and you won't be able to avoid problems." Charlotte angrily said that Emily was her friend and that he shouldn't even think about touching her. Then she threw the cup of tea and kicked it, and it shattered into pieces. Marquis Spring told her to look for someone better if she wanted friends. "Do you want to ruin the future because of an ill-mannered dog?" asked the Marquis. Charlotte became furious and asked if he was threatening her, since only she could be the heir to the Spring family. The Marquis looked at her sternly and said that he was the leader now and that she should understand this. The girl clenched her teeth in anger and whispered that she would do as he said. Lawrence's mansion, it's Claire's birthday, and she's presented with a gorgeous bouquet of flowers. She happily accepted them and thanked them, then asked Ellis how she knew about her birthday. Ellis replied with a smile that she had asked the butler, and remembered that the Bronson family had once celebrated a birthday in the winter. That's right, Claire said, and began to remember that it was Samantha's birthday. And the heroine hasn't received any congratulations since she was 10 years old. Then Ellis told her with a smile that that was not all. Claire asked in surprise what else. And she also gave her a plush dolphin created by Alfred, perfume from Albress, and a custom-made birthday cake. Claire was absolutely delighted and looked at her gifts with such admiration. She began to thank Miss Ellis with all her heart because she had prepared so many gifts for her. Ellis replied that it was all a trifle and smiled at the lady. A few days ago, Claire asked Brooks not to refuse a visit from Ellis Engels. The guy replied that there were some controversial points, but if you think about it, it might make her wary, so it would be safer this way. He then said that if she was up to something, it would be better to pretend to be friends and watch her, but not trust her. We still don't know what Brooks had in mind. And Claire looked at the hero with alarm, and then said that she understood everything. The heroine looked at Ellis and thought to herself what was really on her mind. The girls went into the living room where the table was already set. They drank tea with cake and pastries. Here the heroine called Vaudin to show Ellis her progress. She was delighted with how he had grown. They watched as it circled above them, and Ellis said it was as big as her dog. "Do you have a dog?" Claire asked with interest. Ellis replied that she had a retriever and said that she could come visit her and look at it. Then she added that it would be just right to practice on a living creature before the hunt. Claire said she didn't want to strangle the dog, and Ellis said that's not what she meant, by the way. "My favorite YouTube viewer. If you subscribe to my channel, you will be the best subscriber and viewer." After thinking for a moment, she said, "Let's do it this way. The dog hates bathing, and you can help me with your abilities." "Well," she asked her, and the girl agreed to it. At the Engels mansion, Vaudin circled Ellis's dog and they played together beautifully. Vaudin kept splashing water with the dog, and she really enjoyed this game. But when the dog was all wet, she sat down and howled. Claire looked at her and giggled. "She would have definitely attacked me if it weren't for Vaudin," the heroine said with a smile. And Ellis said in response that they finally bathed Jessie. They couldn't persuade her for 8 months. Afterwards, Ellis noted that Vaudin had become much faster, and that participating in the hunt would not be a problem. Claire closed her eyes and said that she would also try not to regret anything. The maid took the dog away to finish washing it. Then the heroine decided to ask if they don't usually prepare handkerchiefs for the participants. "Are you cooking for someone?" Ellis asked her. Claire replied that it was for Brooks. He said that he would also participate. Ellis asked her to show her a famous clothing store. The heroine thought for a bit and said that she would like to do the embroidery herself, and if there was someone who could help her. "Of course," Ellis answered, smiling and saying that this man was standing right in front of her. She then said that Elle was actually better at embroidery, and she could never beat him at it. Claire asked who Elle was. They approached a painting of a young man who looked like her, and Ellis said it was her brother, Elliot Engels. "Is it true that he is handsome?" asked Ellis. "Yes," the girl answered. Ellis suddenly asked if Elliot was more handsome than the Marquis. The heroine looked at the painting again and said that she didn't think so. And so time flew by, Ellis helping Claire with the handkerchief. The day of the hunting competition has arrived. All the participants arrived at Ramon Forest, including Claire and Brooks Lawrence. As soon as the heroine got off the carriage, she gasped at all this beauty. At this point, Claire turned to Brooks and called him over. And holding a handkerchief in her hands, she told him that he was also participating in the competition, so she decided to prepare. "Here, take this please," said the girl and handed him a handkerchief. Brooks held out his hand and Claire said it was a 4-leaf clover, which is considered a symbol of good luck. "Who made this scarf, Joseph or Ronald?" Brooks asked with a smile. "No," the girl said incorrectly. "It was the clumsy work of a newbie named Claire Lawrence." Brooks was amazed and said, "Oh my God, you personally made me a scarf." The girl shyly said that yes, that was what she wanted to show the sincerity of her feelings. The hero said that this was a very cool gift, and it seemed that today he was luckier than the god of luck himself. Then he handed her a box with a bow and said, "This is my handkerchief for you." The girl took the gift and thanked her husband. She opened the box and he asked her if she liked the scarf. The heroine took out a handkerchief and told him, after all, he said that the handkerchief would not be too luxurious. Brooks said it was a fairly modest scarf and anyone would agree. Then he smiled and said that although in this place many people cannot distinguish luxury from modesty, it would be better for Ellis to ask, not them. The girl objected, saying that Ellis was his subordinate, and would she really answer honestly? He replied that it was hard to trust someone else. They had been together for 3 months already. She laughed and said that he acts as if they have been together for 30 years. Brooke smiled back at her and said that it was 3 months now, and then it would be 30 years. The heroine looked at him in surprise and said to herself, "I'm 30 years old." Then I thought sadly that this was impossible. She looked down and thought about how their married life had less than a year left to exist, and Brooks looked at her questioningly. As soon as the hero wanted to say something, she interrupted him, telling him that she would thank him for the gift anyway, but she would not be able to use it as a handkerchief. Brooks smiled and said that there were other uses then. After asking for forgiveness, he turned her back to him and tied the scarf on her ponytail. "Ready," Brooks said, and she looked at him in surprise, turning around. The guy with a satisfied face told his wife that it suited her very well. The heroine smiled back at him and said that she had told him that she couldn't use him as a handkerchief. And then suddenly they shouted about the start of the hunting competition and for all participants to gather together. Behind the head of the competition, there was a board with a list of participants. Claire looked at the list and said she was in the initial ones, and she turned to Brooks. He read the experts on the board with displeasure. Then he said that it was Will who submitted his application for an expert, and he would go now and change it. The girl replied that it was too late to change it. "The devil," Brooks said with annoyance, and Claire said she had to go and wished him luck. The heroine stood stretching her arms and preparing for her first competition. Suddenly someone hit her right on the back of the head from behind. It was Emily Smith. She gave Claire a fake smile and said, "Oh my God, I didn't run into you on purpose. You were in my way. Be careful." The main character, without raising her head, said her name, Miss Emily Smith. Emily continued sarcastically, asking her if she really decided to participate in the competition, and she would be looking forward to seeing what artifacts Claire would show this time. The girl looked at her and then said that she was grateful to her for waiting for this and said that she had to go. When Claire turned away from her, Emily looked at her angrily, and the heroine began to think that she somehow did not see Charlotte, with whom Emily always goes. She came alone or something, and thought that she had better leave here quickly. But suddenly Emily stopped her and asked where she was rushing to. The heroine looked at her and said that if she wanted to say something, she should say it faster. She didn't have much time. Emily smiled and said that she seemed to have changed a lot since marriage, and it seemed that she felt that she was behind her husband's strong back. Claire told her that she didn't think she should tell her off about it. But Emily tried to yell at her when Ellis arrived and calmed her down, telling her that she needed to stop. The three of them stood there. Emily was very angry. All the people around were crowded and watching how this conflict would end. "Ha! Even Madame Engels is there," Emily said, and added that, after all, the rumors are true about the power of the Marquis's family. At this point, Claire intervened and told her to be careful with her words, and not to think that Emily would want to step on the same rake again. "Or have you forgotten what happened last time?" the heroine asked. "What did you say?" Emily said angrily, and she continued with a grin that she was very scared, and asked if she was in danger now. Then, as she left, Emily told Claire not to worry. They would never see each other again anyway. Ellis asked Miss Emily if she understood what she was saying now. The heroine suddenly thought why Emily came to her, and it didn't seem like she came to quarrel. Suddenly, Ellis looked at the heroine and asked what that smell was coming from her. Claire replied that she used the perfume that she gave her for her birthday, because she said that it was a happy perfume. Ellis hesitated a little, told her well yes, and thought about the fact that it seemed to her that the perfume was different, that it smelled somehow different. Claire asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing and smiled at her. "We have to get going," Ellis said, and the girl agreed with her. They went into the forest. Claire saw a rabbit and ran after it, then called Voden. Voden began to circle around the rabbit, and Claire controlled him perfectly. Now she had to strangle him with water, she thought. Voden began to strangle the rabbit, but the poor thing squealed pitifully. Claire continued to choke the poor rabbit with water, and the girl began to cry from the way the rabbit looked at her pitifully and squeaked. Then she ordered Voden to release the rabbit, and he ran away into the forest. Claire stood there in tears, thinking about how she couldn't do it. Voden approached her and hugged her, and she told him that it was not his fault. It was she who was not ready, so she let him go herself. The girl thought dejectedly that even if she managed to find good prey, she still wouldn't be able to kill the animal. Suddenly, she sat down on her knees and watched the beautiful white birds fly, and she thought how beautiful the Ramon forest was. An idea came to her mind, and she smiled and suggested to Voden that they take a walk in the forest. After some time, they came to some lake, and the girl told Voden how beautiful it was there. She came closer to the lake and bent down looking at the water. She noticed how clean the water was here, and she thought that she could even clearly see her reflection. The heroine was about to touch the water when she heard some rustling behind her. It was a beautiful deer who looked at her and seemed to understand everything. The deer came very close to the girl and stood next to her and began to drink water. The girl thought that it seemed that this deer was not very afraid of people. The deer began to sniff closer and closer to the girl, and she wondered what he was sniffing here all the time and remembered that it was the smell of cookies. "Do you want to eat this?" The girl showed the handkerchief to the deer, and the heroine opened the handkerchief, put it on the ground, and told him to help himself. The fawn began to eat everything with appetite, and Claire kept being touched by him and telling him not to hurry, but the deer was so carried away that he almost completely ate the scarf. The girl shouted at him, "No, you can't eat that," but the deer got scared and ran away with the handkerchief in his teeth. But the heroine immediately ordered Vodin to catch up with him. Vodin quickly ran after him and circled around the deer's legs to make him stop. The deer fell. The girl ran closer and saw how he lay unconscious, but the scarf was intact and lay next to him. The heroine took the scarf and began to examine it. It turned out to be torn in places. "I won't be able to use it anymore. Why did I even come here?" Claire thought sadly. The girl squatted down and, lowering her head, began to cry. Did she really need to go to these competitions? Vodin was already big, and besides, she would die soon anyway. She began to think that for the first time in her life she had motivation, but in the end, nothing came of it. Here, Vodin hugged her again, and she told him that she didn't think she could do it and suggested that she come back. Suddenly, a terrible beast appeared out of nowhere and growled at the girl. She looked at him in fear. Emily's carriage was racing through the Ramon forest. She sat there very excited and thinking. Emily wondered if she had succeeded. She had deliberately provoked Claire in front of everyone. No one had realized that it was her plan. "This woman is bad," she said. "How dare she spread all sorts of rumors, and Charlotte Spring doesn't help me, although I always did everything for her." Suddenly something happened to the carriage, and Emily suddenly became ill. Will she be able to survive? She kept screaming and calling for help, saying that she couldn't breathe anymore. Claire thought about how this was a beginner's course. So where did the wolf come from? The wolf growled and jumped on the girl. She turned away in fear and covered her head with her hands. Suddenly a dagger plunges straight into the wolf's head, and he falls. The heroine looks at the wolf in fear and cannot understand what happened or where the dagger came from. "Mrs. Lawrence, are you all right?" Madame Ellis called to her. She ran up to Claire and apologized for being so late, that she should have gone straight to her instead of to Miss Emily. Miss Emily Smith asked her heroine again and wondered if it was really her then. Ellis interrupted her, saying that her smell attracted monsters and apologized for not realizing it right away, but someone had tried to make sure she didn't notice. Claire suddenly realized why Emily had confronted her back then. It had been her plan all along. Ellis said that Claire couldn't stay here because all the monsters would run and that she would take her to the starting point. But the heroine objected, saying that the monsters could run in a crowded place, and that it would be better for her to swim in the lake. Madame Ellis thought about the water for a while and said that Vodin could help her. He could purify it. "Okay, I've completely forgotten about you, Vodin. Then I'll rely on you," Claire said and extended her hand. Suddenly, Brooks hugged the heroine from behind and said that it was too cold outside for her to swim. The heroine opened her mouth in surprise at seeing the Marquis here. Then she asked him how he ended up here. Wasn't his course far from them? Brooks said he took just one step. The girl clarified by chance the step was not with the help of magic. He answered cheerfully. How insightful she was. "Don't worry," the guy said. "I'll use purification magic." He snapped his fingers and a bright glow appeared around Claire. She looked at everything with delight. The glow continued to circle around Brooks and Claire. A light wind blew. The girl took out her scarf and looked at it. "I'm done," Brooks said suddenly, and the girl thanked him for his help. Claire looked at her husband and handed him the handkerchief, saying that she couldn't save him. It was all her fault. Brooks looked at her and said there was nothing wrong with it. He took Claire's hands, which contained a handkerchief, and it miraculously turned into a beautiful blue rose. Claire couldn't take her eyes off the magic that was happening before her eyes. The hero took this flower and attached it to her hair. Then, admiring his wife, he said that it suited her very well. The girl looked at him with admiration and gratitude and thought to herself, "Brooks Lawrence helped me." "Let's go," said the guy, turning to Ellis and saying that the competition wasn't over yet, but they'd better get back. Ellis said she would go with them then too, but Brooks told her no. "You can enjoy the hunt," he said, and left with Claire. Ellis laughed and said that yes, if you think about it, she hasn't caught anything yet and she'll look around a bit. and let them go. Claire turned to her and said with a smile, "Okay, thank you, Madam Ellis, we'll go." Ellis bowed after them and thought about something. As she stood there, warriors came up to her and pointed their swords at her. "It's good you're paying attention, we could have just cut your throat," the man said. He continued that his plan was to attack animals, not people. Ellis looked at him questioningly, and he introduced himself as Will, the chief assistant of the Marquis of Lawrence, who, despite all the difficulties, remains his faithful servant. She remained silent. Will asked how she felt about talking to him calmly. He suddenly asked her if it was she who gave that perfume to Mrs. Lawrence. Ellis replied that she did nothing that could harm her. Will said with a smile that he didn't blame her for that. Anyway, he had already checked everything, so there was no problem with that. Ellis said nervously that he had a strange sequence of actions. He replied that the lady was very important to the Marquis, and if something happened to her, Ellis could easily be killed. "But let's get down to business," said Will, and asked why she had come to see Mrs. Lawrence. "I have already said everything," answered Madame Ellis. A strange woman in a robe appeared at the Engels mansion. She introduced herself to Ellis and said that her name was Catherine, and she came to pick up her things. Catherine said that it was about a music box, which was a bird with a broken neck in a cage, with the name Elijah written on it. Ellis said that she didn't know anything, and that she should leave, and she replied that she was the owner of the box. Ellis got angry and asked where the proof was that it was hers and she had never heard of this woman. Catherine asked if she would believe her if she told her everything. In 3 months, Ellis's older brother was to become the head of the Engels family. Ellis was stunned and wanted to say something, but the woman interrupted her and said that Count Engels was missing and would die in 3 months. But father might come back sooner, Ellis objected, and Catherine replied that he wouldn't come back, because, she continued, Brooks Lawrence must have killed him already. Ellis froze in bewilderment and didn't know what to say. Then she continued her story, that after this she accidentally met Mrs. Clare at a tea party. They began a conversation under the pretext of an interest in magic. And she added, saying that she did not want to harm Mrs. in any way. Will asked her if she knew anything about the woman in the cloak. Ellis replied that the woman had gray hair and they had not found the music box she had spoken of. Perhaps it didn't exist to begin with, Ellis continued. It seemed her goal was. Will interrupted her and said that he would pass on her whole story to the Marquis. The assistant began to wonder whether the woman in the cloak wanted to show that she was now in the capital, or whether she had another goal. And suddenly Ellis told him that she also wanted to know something. "Well, go ahead and ask," said Will. She asked him if it was true that Count Engels had died. "Yes," Will answered, and Ellis whispered, "That means he was killed." The assistant asked her if she was thinking about how to take revenge. She replied that no way, she was just sorry that she couldn't kill him. Will asked her in surprise how to kill it. Ellis said he was a very stern man, and the concept of family did not exist for him. "He's just trash," she said, and said that she was afraid that he might come back, and so she says thank you for killing him. The assistant was shocked by her story, but did not say anything about it. Claire and Brooks were riding on a white horse at the time. The guy asked her if she was comfortable. She replied that yes, everything was fine. Then she asked him if he didn't need to hunt now. He replied with a smile that he had already caught what he was supposed to. The girl turned away and said, "Well, that means he's already caught his prey," and he replied, "Yeah." Claire wondered why she was so irritated. It was normal. It seemed like she had become more emotional after returning to the past. She threw all these thoughts aside and asked him, smiling, what he had caught. Brooks said that it was a secret. Because he wanted to make a surprise for her, the girl agreed, saying that it was such a tradition to dedicate the catch to the beloved. Then he asked her about her catch, for she too had wanted to catch a deer for him, hadn't she? The heroine said that it was an accident. The deer just fell on the grass. He replied that an accident is not bad either. They rode on, and the heroine saw those same white birds again and said, "Wow." She looked up and thought how incredible it was. Just recently, she had been wondering what she had forgotten at the competition, and it had been so annoying. But now she was glad to be here. Claire looked at Brooks and thought that maybe this was all because of him. "You're doing great, Claire," the hero suddenly told her. She smiled back at him and said that he was also a good boy. They arrived at the very beginning of the Ramon Forest Point, where most of the participants had already gathered and were discussing something huge lying on the ground and wondering who could have done it, and Claire stood with her mouth open. Someone asked Brooks if he had done it, and he replied proudly that he had. Brooks stood next to the huge green beast and told Claire that he had caught this sea beast especially for her. Claire was shocked and could only say thank you, but the guy said that the animal was not very beautiful, and he knew that it was not what she expected, so he prepared something for her, and he handed her a beautiful white rabbit, which looked very much like the one she had failed to strangle. She looked at the rabbit in surprise and asked Brooks what he wanted to do with the rabbit, a scarf, and he said, "This is what you think of me." "I was joking," Claire said with a laugh and hugged the rabbit. It was evening, and Brooks was sitting in his office reading a letter. The letter read, "The Bronsons have forgiven me." Brooks read it, thought about something, crumpled the letter and threw it away, then asked his assistant what it meant. Will replied that maybe this meant that Catherine had gotten into Bronson, and maybe she had been the one who had incited Emily Smith. Brooks said he noticed Emily acting suspiciously. The assistant said that after that she was found dead in the carriage. The cause of death was a heart attack. But Brooks replied that it was not a heart attack, it was all due to black magic. He felt a faint trace of magic. Then the hero said that Emily Smith did not have magic, but this was someone who had very good abilities. Will then concluded that this meant she was targeting Mrs. Clare. Brooks closed his eyes and said that everyone knew that the Duke didn't care about his eldest daughter and wanted Clare to be perceived only as Lawrence. The assistant asked if Catherine might be in cahoots with Duke Bronson. The hero said that he didn't think so. He wouldn't act so rashly. Brooks thought for a moment and told his assistant to check who Emily Smith had been in contact with and where she had gone. Will bowed before the gentleman and said that they were already working on it, and there was no need to worry about Bronson finding out about it. They had already collected enough evidence anyway. "Okay," Brooks said, and ordered his assistant that he could go. Greedy Brooks said to Chloe in his ear, "You need to protect Waldorf's only daughter, but in exchange you'll have to get rid of Bronson." And she continued that this way this child would be able to gain freedom. Assistant Will and Servant Mason met in the castle corridor. Assistant Will asked him why he was here. If for a report, then now is not the best time. The Marquise is not in the mood. Mason said that if it was because of Catherine, then she would definitely be found. It was just a matter of time. "No," said Will. "The Marquis always gets upset when it comes to the Bronson family." The servant said angrily that he thought it was because the opportunity to take revenge on them was approaching. Assistant Will told him that this was not so. It was all because of Mrs. Clare. Brooks was originally a strange person, but he changed after marriage. "He's gotten even weirder," Deputy Will blurted out. The servant asked him if it was good. The assistant said that it was possible. Then he thought about choosing a gift. And Will began to remember the moment when he discussed the gift with Brooks. The gentleman then asked if the luxurious gift was too much of a burden for the girl, and the assistant only opened his mouth in bewilderment. Will asked the gentleman if he was talking about a gift for Mrs. Lawrence. Brooks said, "Claire is slowly starting to get used to this life. That's why I don't want to give something simple," said the hero. And Will asked if he was talking to him now. Then the Marquis said that there was nothing to be done. He would have to give her a white rose. Rose was asked again by his assistant. Brooks replied that yes, she should like it. Will agreed that Mrs. would definitely like the gift. And Brooks looked sternly at his assistant for making fun of him like that. Then the hero said that this was not what he wanted to give. And he also said that he would like to give her a more meaningful gift, after which she would not grumble at him. The assistant thought for a moment and asked if he wanted to receive a kiss from the missus after the gift. Apologizing again for his words, Will thought that this would be such a good excuse. He thought about how the gentleman looked at Claire differently and how he was sincere towards the missus. On the battlefield, Brooks Lawrence is more like a tough demon, but with her, he is different. Who knew that he could be like this, Will said, and in his head he began to imagine how the gentleman looked at her with loving eyes and gave her flowers. Then he concluded that these are still good changes. "God, the master has changed for the better?" asked the servant Mason, not believing it. Claire came to visit Ellis at the Engels mansion. They drank tea, and Ellis said that she wanted to say something to the heroine. Claire asked her what she seemed to have not wanted to say earlier in front of the Marquise. Then she said that she was surprised by the fact that she sent a carriage for her. Ellis said she wanted to apologize to her. After a short pause, she continued that in fact she had some goal in communicating with her. The heroine became thoughtful after hearing that Ellis was pursuing a goal. Then, closing her eyes, Ellis said that she wanted to know about the Marquise's family, but she had no intention of harming them. However, she in no way justifies her motive for actions. Claire drank her tea and sighed and said, "Who among the nobles does something for no reason?" She began to remember Brooks' words. He told her that he thought it was possible to break up with Ellis Engels. If Miss Engels had bad intentions, Brooks would not have left it that way, the heroine thought. Ellis asked Claire if she would accept her apology. The girl smiled and said that everything was fine. She didn't have to worry. She forgave her. Ellis asked her in surprise if she was angry. She replied that nothing had happened to her, but Ellis still did not calm down and began to say even more persistently that to some extent it was a betrayal on her part, and for some reason Claire was not embarrassed by this. Now the heroine was surprised and told her that she had never looked at this situation in this way. Ellis looked down and said that she thought they were really close, but it seemed that the lady had not counted on her. Claire couldn't understand why she was saying that and stared at her. She wasn't disappointed, Ellis told herself. Ellis thought about Miss Claire Lawrence. She had never met anyone like her. She is very calm and peaceful when they are together. Ellis feels calm. And Ellis thought that Claire felt the same way, but it turned out that she hadn't expected anything from their communication at all. The heroine suddenly turned to her and said that if Ellis wanted to say something, then let her say it. After clearing her throat, Ellis asked the lady if she would like to become her friend. Claire asked her friend again, surprised by this. And the heroine suddenly remembered Tom, how he extended his hand to her and said, "We are friends forever." He was the only friend with whom they started a relationship and got married. But all those words were empty promises. We are friends forever. Now the heroine is indifferent to such words. However, I am a fairly ordinary person, Claire suddenly said, and she continued that even if Ellis communicated with her, she would not receive any benefit from it. Ellis was taken aback and said that she was not looking for any benefit. All she wanted was to talk to her like this over a cup of tea. Then, lowering her head, she said that she asked for forgiveness because she wanted to get her consent to be friends. "Do you mind?" Ellis asked the lady. Claire sat silently, not knowing what to say. Then Ellis said that if the lady doesn't want to, she can refuse. Then she will return to loneliness and will no longer be friends with anyone. The heroine suddenly realized who this style of communication reminded her of, remembered how Brooks gave her a rose and said that if she did not accept the rose, he would have no choice but to burn the entire garden. Claire began to think that she and Ellis were not yet familiar enough, and besides, she did not know if this friendship would be beneficial for her. But, the girl continued to think, the Marquis would soon leave her anyway. Less than a year left before he kills her and gets rid of the Bronsons, so it won't harm her in any way, the heroine thought and said to Madame Ellis, "Okay, we'll still see each other." And she added that she doesn't want to be alone in the mansion all the time. Ellis thanked her and asked if the lady would allow her to be a little cheeky. And she asked the lady if she could call her by name and speak informally. "You can?" Ellis asked the heroine, and she thought about it. After thinking for a moment, Claire smiled and said I could. Ellis. Claire and Brooks were having dinner in the living room and talking, and she informed him that she and Madame Ellis Engels were now friends. Then she said she didn't know if it was right to call their relationship friendship, and Brooks said that if they were close, then it was friendship. "You talked a lot with Madame Engels, didn't you?" the hero asked. She asked the Marquis if he had any friends, and he said that for some reason this question hurt him. The girl continued asking if he really had no friends, since he communicated well with many people. Brooks replied that yes, with many, but they are not friends for him. His wife is more important. The heroine was a little shocked by his words and said that she understood him. "Is there anything else you want to ask?" Brooks said, and she began to think. Then Claire asked him if there was another person close to him, wasn't there? She was talking about Assistant Will, and he replied that she shouldn't exaggerate. "By the way, I understand that the owner of the Engels family will soon change," the heroine asked. "Yes, I heard that too," Brooks answered. The hero said that there were a lot of rumors about this, and asked if she considered such a person handsome. The girl answered yes. He said that he was not talking about himself now, but about Ellis's brother, and Claire replied that he was handsome and looked like Ellis. The hero put drawings of dresses on the table and told the heroine to choose what she liked. The girl asked in surprise why she needed a dress, since she already had enough of them, but the hero said that there would soon be a ball in honor of the hunting competition. Then he said that her dress should match his clothes. Claire asked if she absolutely had to go. He replied that if she didn't want to, she didn't have to go. Brooks said that he couldn't not go, however, because he had won first place in the competition, and he needed a partner for that. He had no other close people, so it would be a little awkward for him. And then the girl agreed to go with him. But the girl said that she didn't need a new dress. She didn't want to stand out too much. Brooks simply responded to this by saying that the more delicious food you eat, the better your taste buds become, and it seems she has not yet gotten used to luxury. He said that from now on, all the clothes and food would be better than she had before, and added that he wanted to see her in something that she would really like. A couple of days later, Claire was still wondering which dress to choose. Brooks, sipping tea and smiling, said that he had already paid for each dress model and did not want to see these dresses on other misses. The girl asked in surprise if he had really bought all of this. The girl asked him why he spent money on a dress design that she wouldn't even wear. "These aren't just models," Brooks said, snapping his fingers as the drawings instantly turned into real dresses and swirled above her head. The heroine looked at them and could not believe her eyes. Brooks said it was better for her to try everything on herself so she could decide which one she liked best. The girl resigned herself and said, "Okay, it's his money, and he can do with it as he wants." The hero laughed in response and said, "Thank you for the permission." She looked at the models again and settled on a green dress and said that she liked it. The guy asked her if she would be cold in this dress. There were other options, but she said that it was okay. She would be indoors. He thought for a moment and said, "Okay, she can try it on," and the girl thanked him. The girl tried on this charming green dress, and looking at herself in the mirror, she was finally satisfied. Brooks looked at his wife and said she was beautiful in anything she wore. She thanked him and said that she felt she needed to work on her posture. The hero raised his eyebrows and asked if his praise didn't seem sincere to her. "Anyway," Brooks said, looking at her neck and saying she was missing a necklace. She looked at herself in the mirror and said that she wasn't sure it belonged there. Brooks told her not to worry. They would find something that would suit her. Now Claire also asked him if he hadn't heard how sincere her words were. He laughed, and she said that he was probably thinking that she looked like a fool. "No way," Brooks said, pulling her towards him and kissing her. And after the kiss, he said that he was just glad that he had such a sweet wife. The girl blushed and coughed, telling him not to act like a womanizer, and Brooks responded by saying how rude she was, because she was the only woman in his life. "We don't know what will happen next," Claire said sadly. After thinking about her words for a moment, Brooks grabbed her hand, pulled her towards him, and kissed her. She tried to break free and moaned for him to let her go, but the hero continued to kiss her. Then the heroine finally broke away from his kiss, and having caught her breath, said that she almost suffocated. The guy looked at her very strangely, and she didn't understand what this look meant. Brooks then coughed and apologized. The girl sternly told him that his joke had gone too far. He just smiled at her and said that he would be careful in the future. The heroine wanted to tell him something else, but he interrupted her and said that if she chose this dress, then they would make the dress to her size and return it to her ready-made. "I'm going," Brooks said, turning and heading for the door. The girl remained frozen in one place, wondering what had come over him. Brooks walked and thought about what was wrong with him. He was suddenly overwhelmed by emotions, and before he always controlled his emotions. He just didn't want to hear any words of refusal or submission coming from her lips. Suddenly, the hero stood up and hit the pole with his fist and said that this really wasn't like him. The next day, Ellis sat with Claire at breakfast and complained that no one had taken her, even though she had done well in the hunting competition. Ellis then asked the lady if she had a place for her. Claire replied that she could not interfere in these matters, and hadn't she herself said that she didn't need anything from her. Ellis said that she could take the entrance exam herself, and she just wanted to get a place on the exam, but the heroine told her that she could not promise anything and apologized to her. The girl suddenly asked Ellis why she had come today. She replied that she wanted to warn in advance that in honor of the hunting competitions, a ball would be held by the imperial family, where Reacher and Bronson were to announce their engagement. Claire looked at her, then lowered her head and said that it meant it was time for it. Tom and Samantha, the heroine, thought that they would never see each other again, and I didn't expect that they could meet so soon. The girl then smiled at Ellis and continued drinking her tea. Ellis thought about her, how she hid her emotions very well, and it seemed to her that now she was hiding something. Will the day ever come when she can trust someone? But Ellis suddenly thought sadly that she would never be that person for her. Little Brooks stood at the window as it rained heavily. Chloe called him and asked if he didn't like the way she looked. "Listen to me," she said. "The more you don't have, the more you want to seem more luxurious, because such people don't want to be looked down upon." Chloe continued by saying that the baby was beautiful and that she seemed to fit into a red dress. But oddly enough, Chloe herself began wearing more and more regular, everyday clothes. "But I repeat to you again," she told him, "that the bright dress looks more beautiful." Brooks said he didn't care about clothes as clothes. Chloe told him that you can be born with everything, but be completely empty inside. and asked if he didn't think she should at least dress nicely. That was not the answer, Brooks replied, and she said he was right, but he would soon love luxury too. And in the end, he will look for love. There is nothing more beautiful than love, but she does not know if he will ever be able to love. Chloe said about Claire that this child is beautiful and she thinks a red dress would suit her. In the end, Brooks said he still liked the color red. The girl at breakfast asked him if he wanted another dress. No, it's okay, Brooks said. Then Claire joked that she thought he had done enough to improve the country's economy with his purchases, and he laughed. The hero began to think that he would never have thought that his wife could refuse him. What happened, the heroine asked him, and he replied that he wanted to say that this green dress suited her white skin very well. Then he smiled and said that although he liked the color red, green wasn't bad either. The girl thanked him and he silently nodded back. Then Brooks left, saying he had things to do. As the hero was leaving, he banged his fist on the open door and walked out. Claire thought he was behaving strangely, and I decided to ask Will's assistant if he knew by any chance what was wrong with Brooks. Maybe the problem was in the dress. He said no. Smiling at her, he replied that he thought it was because she was very beautiful. The girl said he wasn't telling the truth. It looked like Brooks told him what was going on. Nobody told me anything, said Assistant Will. The assistant began to recall a recent conversation with Brooks, who was sitting at his desk and tapping his fingers on it. Will told him that he could ask Mrs. Claire to change into another dress. Brooks told him that the main thing is that Claire likes him. Nothing else matters. The assistant dared to say that the gentleman was absolutely not concerned about what the lady would wear. The hero threatened him that he could cut his bonuses, and he asked why he was immediately dumping everything on him. Then Deputy Will told him if he knew when he was acting at his weirdest. Brooks looked at him questioningly, and he continued that when he cannot stand in front of Mrs. and say what he likes and what he doesn't, he asked why he behaves like that in front of her. Brooks suddenly said that he didn't like him and that he only loved his wife. In any case, the assistant continued, if you don't say it, then I'll do it for you. The lady should know about your true feelings. The hero got angry and told him not to cross the line, and as soon as Brooks got up from his seat, the maid suddenly came in and said that it was time to leave and that she would go now to warn the mistress. Assistant Will and the maid bowed to Brooks and prepared to leave. But the hero told his assistant that he was very lucky today. The maid looked at Will's assistant, then at her master with concern and fear. As they left the office, Will told the maid that he was grateful that she had come in on time. It was time for the ball. Claire and Brooks arrived at the luxurious castle. All the guests of the evening stood on the red carpet and looked with interest at their carriage. As soon as Brooks and Claire got off the carriage, everyone began to whisper that the Marquis and Marchioness of Lawrence had arrived. One of the girls said that Mrs. Lawrence became much more beautiful after she got married. And the complexion became better, someone said, and Claire walked and heard it all. Already in the hall, some girls started asking the heroine questions. One asked what kind of cosmetics she uses, and the dress is very beautiful. Who made it? And another said that the missus has such beautiful skin. Claire thanked them for the compliment with a smile. The men standing near Brooks were talking about the new tax policy, but he wasn't listening to them. He was looking only at his wife, and Brooks looked at her cleavage and thought about something of his own. Someone standing next to him called him and he apologized, saying that he had gotten a little distracted. The hero took a glass from a passing waiter who asked him if he liked the ball. Will, is it you? Brooks said, asking what his outfit was. The assistant replied that it was so cold today that he decided that the cape would be ideal for the weather. Brooks stood and thought about something again. Claire and the girls were standing not far from him. Will asked him what he didn't like, and the Marquis replied that he had told him not to cross the line and asked how much the cape cost. 3, said the assistant, pointing, and Brooks, perplexed, said 300 gold, for that was robbery. The assistant told him not to be petty. Didn't he himself say that he would prepare the best for his beloved? Brooks looked at him and said, okay, deal. The assistant said excellent and gave him the cape, then wished him to enjoy the ball. As Brooks stood with the cape in his hands, someone approached him and said, long time no see, Marquis Lawrence. It was Claire's father. The hero did not expect to see him. Your Excellency Duke Bronson, the boy greeted him. The Duke asked him how he was doing. At this time, Claire went out onto the terrace to get some fresh air. She was very tired. She thought about how at such parties few people had spoken to her before. Then she felt cold and wanted to go inside, when suddenly someone also came out onto the terrace. The heroine turned around and saw Tom Reacher. Claire told him that he shouldn't have left the terrace after he saw that someone was there. I wanted to meet you, Tom said. "What happened, Sir Reacher?" the heroine asked him. He got angry, clenched his fist, and told her not to call him that. After a short silence, Tom said that she had a beautiful dress, and he was sorry that she had married a man who would not let her wear the clothes she liked. Claire frowned and asked what he was talking about. Tom replied that she had never worn anything like that before the wedding. She had always liked simple clothes, and they suited her very well. The girl told him that she actually liked the dress, and she screamed that it was her choice. He couldn't believe it, and asked her again if it was her choice. Claire closed her eyes and replied that yes, she liked it. Tom was perplexed and began to shout that he couldn't believe it was her. He covered his ears and stood there, and the girl looked at him and was in shock. Then the heroine told him that she thought they had nothing more to talk about. When she said she was leaving and wanted to take a step, Tom grabbed her hand and asked her to stop. Claire asked him what he was doing and asked him to let go of his hand. But Tom kept holding on and asked her if she was happy that she had married Brooks. The heroine replied that everything suited her. Then she said again to let go, pulled her hand away, and left. Tom turned around to stop her, but it was too late. Claire was gone. The girl entered the hall and thought that even inside it had become chilly. But suddenly Brooks came up behind her and carefully placed a cape on her shoulders and said that it was chilly today, wasn't it? Claire looked at him gratefully. As they stood there, a girl came up to them and, apologizing, asked Marcus Lawrence if she could invite him to dance. Brooks politely told her that due to a leg injury, he would not be able to dance with her. The girl, confused, said okay and walked away, and when she had already moved further away, she said that this was happening to him. Brooks then extended his hand to his wife and asked if she would dance with him. "And how is your leg?" Claire asked, and he answered with a smile that it was almost healed. And she told him that, well, he was really good at healing magic. Brooks replied that he was so good at it that he used pain-relieving magic for it. They started dancing, and the girl told him that he danced well, and he smiled at her. Then he leaned closer to her face and winked, and said that it was all because she was with him. As they danced, Tom Reacher watched them, his face dark as a thundercloud. Tom stood there, unable to believe his eyes, and he couldn't get the words she had said before out of his head. He thought about her, remembered their childhood together, the past, and that Tom was her only friend who was always with her. So why is Claire with this man? Tom still didn't calm down. And suddenly, his memories turned into others, unfamiliar to him now, where Claire asked him to stay with her for a while. And as her body disappeared in the coffin along with Brooks, through some portal, Tom screamed, "No, bring it back." The guy thought and did not understand what kind of memories these were. And Samantha came up to him, worried about what had happened to him, and asked if he was okay. "Yes, everything is fine," Ellie said suddenly, Tom. Samantha was stunned by what Ellie was. Tom walked away, covering his face with his hand and talking about what he had just said and apologizing to Samantha, telling her that he was not feeling well and would be out for a while. Samantha was left wondering who Ellie was. He wasn't dating another woman. Although a piece of trash like him could do something like that, she thought. Claire and Brooks finished dancing and then bowed to each other. The Marquis offered her a glass of champagne. She thanked him and said that she really wanted to drink something. Then Samantha came up to the heroine and called her. "Long time no see," she said, Samantha. Brooks looked at her and she said she needed to talk to her sister. Then she smiled and asked Claire if she could spare some of her time. They went out onto the terrace and Samantha told her that she was engaged. Claire replied with a smile that it was time and congratulated him on his engagement. Samantha sadly told her sister that she didn't really want to get engaged, and she added that she admires her and Brooks very much. Then she continued that if she had a choice, she would have wanted to choose her own groom, but in the end, she did as her mother said. Claire just remained silent, and Samantha suddenly said, "What if she asked them for help?" She looked at her sister with hope, and then turned away and said that no, it was better for her to forget. There was nothing she could do about it anyway. Claire asked her sister what happened. She replied nothing. She was on the right path. Then Samantha smiled and said that everything was fine. The main character did not understand that this was happening to her sister. And Sister Claire smiled and asked her forgiveness and said that it was her mistake to tell her such a thing just after a month of engagement. Then she said that it was time for her to leave, and Claire told her not to worry. Tom definitely loved her. Samantha turned to her, smiled, and said yes and left. The heroine was left thinking about what was wrong with her sister. Maybe she had premarital depression. Tom truly loves Samantha. Claire knows this better than anyone. But Samantha is not sure whether she loves Tom. When Claire entered the hall, she saw Samantha standing and talking with her mother and Duke Bronson. Claire looked at them and told herself that she seemed to be thinking too much. After all, Samantha doesn't have to get married if she doesn't want to. Besides, the main thing is that the Duke and Duchess Bronson protect Samantha. They will not allow her to be unhappy. Then Brooks approached Claire with drinks and asked if she had spoken to her sister yet. The girl said that they talked about her engagement, and not everything was going smoothly there. Brooks said it seemed like her sister had low standards, and the character responded that she thought Samantha made a good choice. Tom Reacher is the best groom in the Empire, the girl said. The hero said that it was because he was already married, and Claire answered that he was very confident in himself. The girl continued that she thought Tom was a good option. No wonder he was considered the best groom. Brooks told her that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, because its content is much more important. And Claire told him that this was said by a person who really loved luxurious clothes. He said he could take off his clothes if she wanted. Claire was surprised, and he said that it was because under his clothes, everything was even more gorgeous. "What are you saying?" the heroine said, blushing. And he replied that he said that under this outerwear he has the same chic clothes. The girl said that she had misunderstood everything, and he told her with a smile that she blushed. "I know," Claire said, touching her cheek. "Why are you so cute?" Brooks told her. The girl looked at him questioningly, and the hero approached her and kissed her. Claire blushed even more and told him that people were looking at them and that he was attracting attention as always. He laughed and said that he liked her confused expression. It was a pity that this moment would not last long. But people were immediately attracted by something completely different. They began to whisper and turn around, saying, "My God, look at this!" There stood Samantha with Tom Reacher and the Empress in front of them. Claire saw them and said it was the Empress, and next to her were Tom and Samantha. The Empress suddenly said that they had good news for all the guests. The heroine looked down and thought that she didn't really want to look at this. Brooks saw out of the corner of his eye that his wife was a little nervous and took her hand. She didn't expect it at first, but then she looked at him with gratitude. And I began to think about Brooks. I wonder if this man, before the heroine got into the past, treated Samantha as well as her. No, the girl thought, this is a stupid question. She already knows what and how it happened. In 6 months, Marquis Lawrence will kill the entire Bronson family. And he will also kill his wife from the Bronson family. The girl thought that she already knew how her life would end. The next day, the heroine walked in the garden and admired the flowers. Then Miss Ellis came up to her and said that the garden was very beautiful. The girl looked at her and asked why she came without saying a word. Ellis replied with a smile that she had come for an interview with the Knights of Lawrence. She then said that she decided to come to her for a while and asked if she would mind if she became a vassal of the Lawrence family. Claire told her that she was not at all against it and would even be glad. Ellis thanked her and said goodbye to her, telling her to wish her success. The maid asked the mistress what she thought, whether they would take Ellis or not. The heroine replied that she didn't even know if she would succeed. After some time, Claire and Ellis were sitting at the table and drinking tea. The heroine asked her what she thought. Would there be a positive verdict? Ellis replied that few people could refuse a capable person like her. Then the heroine answered well and said that she wanted to ask her husband's birthday is just around the corner, and she doesn't know what gift to give him. Ellis replied that it was not an easy task, because the Marquise was very difficult to surprise, and in fact she had never given gifts to men except Elle. Then it suddenly dawned on Ellis and she said, "Oh, right, we can ask Elle." The heroine looked at her in bewilderment, wondering how they would ask him. And the knight said that he just arrived at the mansion today. Suddenly, Brooks came in and asked if he could come in. Claire told him that he had come early today and that they had decided to go to the Engels mansion and would like to meet Elal. Brooks's face darkened, and he asked again if she had really decided to go to the Engels mansion. And he asked Claire what she wanted to talk about with Elle. The girl didn't know what to answer. She couldn't tell him that she was going to Elle to ask what kind of gift would be best to buy for Brooks. Then she answered him that she just wanted to see him. "Don't worry," Ellis said. "I'll have your wife back by this evening." Brooks was seething with anger, then said he would send a carriage for them so she could drive there. Ellis said there was no need to worry, they could provide their own carriage. Brooks smiled and said no, because he wanted to make sure he wasn't dining alone. Ellis giggled and said that it seemed like he often felt lonely. Claire intervened in their conversation and told Ellis that Brooks was just joking and that she shouldn't fall for it. Then the heroine smiled at her husband and said that she would be back soon. Brooks stood silently and watched his wife leave with Miss Ellis. Then Will told the owner that maybe it was time to confess, and Brooks said no, he didn't love her. And he asked what the reason for love was. He didn't have one. You can fall in love without a reason. He thought that maybe he loved her after all, but he pushed these thoughts away and thought that this couldn't be. that something was wrong with him. Assistant Will looked at his master and thought, God, what a slow-witted man he was. As Claire and Ellis were driving to the mansion, the heroine thought about something. Ellis asked her what she was thinking about. She replied that she was thinking about nothing. Then she decided to say that she thought Brooks looked a little strange and wondered what was going on. Ellis asked her if she really didn't understand. The girl looked at her questioningly. Then Ellis said that the Marquis was jealous of her towards Elle because the Marquis loved her very much. The girl replied that that was definitely not the issue. The heroine began to think that he couldn't think like that. He was just playing the role of a good husband. Ellis suddenly asked her how the dance had gone. She had heard Reacher announce his engagement and what he was thinking when he made such an announcement with Claire there too. The girl answered that they wanted to show everyone their place. The royal family wanted to celebrate Reacher and Bronson's reunion because they wanted their power. Claire continued. Ellis told her that she was saying that as if it concerned her, and Claire replied that she was just sad about it. Of course, she was annoyed by the fact that she ran into Tom. And with Samantha living in the same house, they had never really communicated with Claire before. Samantha always felt awkward around her, but she was so small that Claire never resented her. And Ellis asked why she thought the Marquis didn't love her. She replied that she was the eldest daughter of the Bronson family and she was supposed to marry Lawrence. If Claire had married Tom, Brooks would have proposed to Samantha, that's all. In other words, Brooks would have behaved exactly the same way the heroine ended up with her. Ellis said sadly that she didn't think that was the case, and the girl smiled at her and said that she knew for sure that it was so. Claire began to think that she was actually becoming greedy the more time they spent together, the more she wants her to become a little special for him. She already shows her greed in this way, it's better not to even count on more. This way she can die with a smile on her face. The heroine told Ellis that since she met Samantha, she can't think about it. It's strange, really, she asked. Ellis said that it was normal because Brooks was her husband, and it was the first time she had ever heard Claire tell her anything like that, and she was glad that they had become a little closer. Claire smiled and said she reminded her of Brooks. Ellis was surprised and asked how they were similar, and the heroine replied that they were similar because she was also a little strange. "Why am I weird? I demand an explanation," Ellis said, and Claire just laughed and thought that she had previously thought that Ellis had an ulterior motive when she said she wanted to be friends with her. But now the girl doesn't think about it, because she's going to die soon anyway. So she said that she doesn't mind being friends with her. And now Claire realizes how nice it is to be with Ellis. I wonder what she will feel when Claire dies. And the heroine became friends with her because she knew that her days were numbered. It was very selfish of her. Ellis stared at her with great curiosity, and the girl smiled and replied that one day she would tell her everything. And she also said that she would like her to pretend that she didn't know anything after she told her this. Her words made Ellis even more worried. Claire thought she wanted everyone to think it was an accident. And she wants everyone to forget about the Lawrence family tragedy, to forget about her, to forget about all of this. They had already arrived at the mansion and were talking to Elle about the gift. He said, why not give Claire something she's good at? Ellis asked him if that was all he had to offer, and he replied that the best gift was a sincere gift. Ellis was shocked. She said that they already knew this. Why did she bring Claire to the mansion then? Elle asked his sister and Claire for forgiveness, and the heroine told him not to worry. He helped her a lot. She thought about a gift that only she could give. The heroine came home and told the servant and assistant that she needed their help. They looked at each other, and Mason said with displeasure that he could of course help her in his free time. But why try so hard when the owner didn't care about his day? But Will, on the contrary, was delighted and said that the owner would be very happy to receive a gift from her. The girl thanked them and asked them to keep it a secret from Brooks. Of course we won't tell anything, they said, and Claire left. A few days later, the heroine stood in front of the mirror and tried on a luxurious dress. Then Brooks came and said that she was very beautiful and that her appearance would outshine the bride and groom. The heroine replied that Samantha would be in charge today, and Claire would not attract attention. "Actually, I thought you weren't going to the engagement," said the hero. Claire replied that she had not intended to go, but then changed her mind. "I want to make sure of this myself," said the heroine, and Brooks asked what she wanted to make sure of. The heroine smiled at him and said, "Let's go." Brooks thought about it and realized that she seemed determined. And he too, like Tom, wants to see Samantha as his wife. And he wants to make sure that this is not a sweet nightmare, but reality. Wedding hall, Tom Reacher adjusts his suit and prepares for the groom's entrance. Samantha came to him and told him that he looked very handsome today. He thanked her and said that she looked very good too. Samantha decided to tell him that her sister would also be arriving today. Tom asked why she should go if she wasn't going to be truly happy about the holiday. Samantha thought about her fiancé, that he seems like a normal person. But in reality, he is so narrow-minded, and why should she be with him? Tom's fiancé asked him if his headaches were bothering him more. He replied that no. He had been sleeping well lately and his head didn't hurt. Samantha said with a smile that that was good and offered to straighten his tie. Tom thought to himself that he had done the right thing when he chose Samantha, and soon the strange dreams with headaches should go away completely. Done, she said, and smiled at him. Tom thanked her. Then Samantha said that she also needed to get ready, and it was time to go. The wedding hall, the ceremony is taking place. Tom and Samantha exchange rings in front of witnesses and a clergyman. Tom puts the ring on her finger. She smiles and presses her hands to her chest. Then the bride and groom exchange vows of love and fidelity. As Samantha was reading the vows, Tom heard someone enter and caught a glimpse of them out of the corner of his eye. It was the Marquise and Marchioness of Lawrence, whom the groom did not expect to see. Tom said to himself, "Claire, why did you come?" And suddenly his head started to hurt again, and all the same memories began, how Brooks took Claire's body. And Tom shouts after him, "Please give me back Archduke Lawrence," and also memories associated with Claire, how she asks him if he will be late today. And the girl is left alone, sad, and Tom couldn't do anything. And suddenly Tom Reacher faints from all these memories and an unbearable headache. All the guests are in shock, Samantha too, and she screams what happened to him. The bride, exhausted, sat down next to Tom and kept saying his name so that he would wake up. Brooks said Tom Reacher had lost consciousness, and it looked like the engagement ceremony should be postponed. The main character asked what happened to him. After all, Tom is a healthy person. Something like this has never happened to him. The Marquis looked at her and asked if she was worried about him. But the girl was a little confused and replied that no, she just didn't want to see him again. Too quick an answer, thought the hero, and looked suspiciously at his wife. Then he smiled at her and told her not to worry. They would not see each other anymore. Claire smiled back at him and agreed with him. After a short silence, Brooks said that it was very noisy here and suggested that they leave. The girl responded well. As she left, the heroine turned around one last time to look at Tom. Brooks and Claire were having breakfast in the garden, and the hero said that Tom had been unconscious for several days and that nights usually don't have that often. But it looked like he was really feeling very bad. The girl replied that, yes, it looked like it. Then the girl added that Tom has a good doctor, so he will recover quickly. And she asked Brooks if she could go to the Engels mansion because she wanted to spend the evening with Ellis. The hero smiled at her and replied that there was no need to go. They would soon go to them together. Claire asked him when they could go there. Ellis felt lonely since Earl Elliot would not be in the mansion for a whole month. He replied that it meant the Earl was not in the mansion. Brooks then said with a smile that their trip was then canceled and she could go on her own. What? Claire asked him again and wondered why he changed his mind. The hero told her that she could decide for herself when and where to go. "Have a good time," Brooks said, and turned to leave. The girl just said okay and was left wondering what was wrong with him. Brooks Lawrence walked along and thought that he had been acting strange lately. Then he stopped and told himself that he needed to keep his distance from her. A few hours later, Brooks was walking down the hall and saw his wife being helped to dress by maids. The hero asked her if they were already preparing for the trip. The girl answered yes. Claire said she was thinking of buying Ellis a gift in exchange for her invitation to the mansion. Brooks listened to all this and couldn't believe his ears. Then she asked him if he had some free time. Would he like to go with her? The hero had no choice but to agree. They arrived at a shopping mall where they sell clothes, silks, and ties. When they entered the store, they were greeted by the salesperson. The girl told him to show them the ties. A few minutes later, the salesman brought her a white tie with a ruby stone. The girl took it in her hands and looked at it, then said that she also wanted to give a gift to Earl Elliot, and asked Brooks, since he had good taste, whether he would help her choose a gift. The hero looked at his wife with displeasure and then said, "Okay, it's not difficult for him." Then Claire asked the salesperson to show her something more colorful, and that she wanted something that would stand out. Brooks thought with indignation what stood out for Elliot she wanted to give. The salesman brought the girl a purple tie, and she was delighted, said how beautiful it was, and the color was very beautiful, and thought to herself that purple should suit the Marquis. The heroine then asked Brooks if he would try on the tie, and he asked her if it wasn't a gift for Elliot. But he had no choice but to agree. She put a tie around his neck and asked him to bow his head, because he was so tall. That's what the guy asked and bowed his head lower. The girl tied her tie and said, "Everything is ready. Now you can stand up straight." Brooks stood up straight, his face impassive. Meanwhile, Claire and the salesman looked at him with delight and admiration. The salesman noted that it was a rather flashy color, but it looked simply stunning on the Marquise, and the heroine said that it really suited him. And then she asked the Marquis of Lawrence what he thought about the tie. He thought that he didn't think something like that would suit Elliot's plain appearance. But he ended up telling the girl that the scarf looked very good. Claire said great and asked the salesperson to pack this tie for her. The salesperson said, "Okay, wait a bit." Brooks thought to himself that he hadn't lied, since he hadn't said who exactly the tie would look good on. While they waited for the present to be wrapped, the girl let Brooks try on hats, one by one. She then helped him try on different shoes. Finally, they came out of the mall, and the girl said with a smile that she had bought so many beautiful decorations, and Brooks was walking behind with boxes, a little dissatisfied. And he asked her if it was too much, and she replied that it was very little compared to how much money had been spent on the last dance. Claire asked him if he usually spent that much money. He didn't know what to answer and just remained silent, but to himself he thought that a dress for his wife and a gift for Elliot were completely different things. The heroine said that she seemed to have bought everything she wanted so they could go back. "Good idea," said the boy, and they headed towards the carriage. The girl thought that Brooks didn't seem to have figured out her plan. She looked at him and thought that today was April 1st, Brooks's birthday. The hero extended his hand to her and said with a smile, "Mrs., let's go home." Claire smiled back at the Marquis, extended her hand and said okay. That same evening, the girl knocked on Brooks's office door. He was sitting and studying some papers. When Claire came to see him, she asked him if he could spare her a minute. He stood up and said, "Of course, how can he not take time for his wife?" and asked if something was wrong. The heroine began to say that the matter was this, and suddenly said that for this, she needed a place where there was no light. And Claire asked the Marquis if he could go with her into the garden. At first, he was a little surprised. Then he smiled and said that he would take her to a better place. Brooks snapped his fingers, and a glow swirled around them, creating a portal. And a moment later, they found themselves in some kind of garden. Claire opened her mouth in surprise. After the glow and the portal disappeared, the girl asked him where they were. The hero answered her that this was Richmond Forest in the Imperial Palace. No one came here, so it was quiet and dark. And he added that no one would know that they were here now. Then he asked what the heroine wanted to talk to him about. The girl plucked up her courage and said that she would like to give him something. And she handed him a huge precious blue stone that looked like a diamond. "What is this, some kind of magic stone?" Brooks thought to himself. The heroine continued to hold this stone in her hands, and it seemed as if water was swirling around it. Then she called Woden. He appeared and hung over the stone, and some kind of miracle began to happen. The stone hung above Claire's hands and began to transform into something else. And after a few moments, the stone turned into an unusual shape in the form of a crystal flower. Brooks opened his mouth in surprise and looked at all this miracle without taking his eyes off. All he did was look and couldn't say anything else. Then the girl handed him this crystal flower and said that it was his birthday present. "Happy birthday," said Claire. And the Marquis was unexpectedly surprised and asked what it was, how. She asked him if he didn't fully understand what was happening, since today was his birthday. The heroine then said that all the gifts she bought today were actually meant for him. Brooks was taken aback, and she continued, asking if he thought she would ask him to try on a gift for someone else. The hero smiled and said that he had completely forgotten about it, and she had managed to fool him. The Marquis held his gift in his hands and said that it was a very beautiful flower. The girl began to tell that she studied hard and even asked Mason's servant to help her, and she was very glad that in the end everything worked out. The heroine then told Brooks that this ice flower would soon melt, but she hoped that it would bring him joy. The Marquis told her that he would enchant the flower with his magic and keep it forever. The girl said that she was proud to have such a talented husband, and he said that he was very glad that he had such a wonderful wife who took care of his birthday. She smiled at him and said that she was glad that he liked the gift. She also wanted to please him. "After all, you prepared my last birthday, thank you," said Claire. Brooks asked the girl if he could pop the question as the birthday boy. The girl looked at him in surprise and said, "Okay, ask." And the Marquis decided to ask Claire why she loved Tom Reacher. The heroine did not expect such a question and did not know what to answer. Brooks apologized for asking such a rude question. Then Claire finally answered, saying that it was just like that, there was no special reason. She said that since childhood she wanted to have a good family, and Tom seemed constant and responsible. That's why I chose him, that's all. The heroine finished. Brooks was silent, thought about something for a while, then asked the girl if she still loved Tom Reacher. Claire didn't look at Brooks, but spoke to him with her back to him and said that she hadn't liked Tom for a long time. She couldn't even remember when she stopped loving him. Then the girl turned to him and asked with a smile why he suddenly decided to ask about this. "Because you are my wife," the hero answered her without thinking. Claire looked the Marquis in the eyes, then lowered her head and remained silent. And then Brooks, after a short silence, told the girl that it was despondency. Through despondency, one can summon the spirit of water, Vodin. The hero continued. The guy asked the girl if he could ask what kind of sadness she felt. And I, dear YouTube viewers, want to ask you about your impressions about this video, which you can leave in the comments. The heroine turned away from him and said, "No, don't ask about that." Brooks lowered his head and said, "Okay." Claire didn't understand why, when suddenly the conversation turned to Tom Reacher. The hero then asked if the Marquis could then ask another question. She said that he only wanted to ask one question. Brooks replied that this time the question would indeed be the last one, and the girl agreed. The Marquis began to say that the question would be quite simple, and that. But then the heroine interrupted him and kissed Brooks on the lips. The hero opened his eyes in surprise and was a little shocked. After the kiss, the Marquis came to his senses a little and asked Claire how she could do this. "You mean how I knew you were going to kiss me?" the girl asked him. "By your eyes," Claire replied, "because your expression changes when you are about to play with me." Brooks didn't expect that answer and asked how to play it. He frowned, grabbed the heroine by the hands, and said that he would now do something that she did not expect. And then he warned her that he was not playing with her at all now. How suddenly Brooks kissed Claire and hugged her tightly. The girl did not expect this from him. And they stood there for a long time, hugging and kissing passionately. At the Bronson mansion, Samantha and her mother discussed Tom Reacher. Samantha began to tell that the priests and doctors said they did not know the cause of Reacher's illness. She continued by saying that his body was fine, but he wouldn't wake up, and she didn't know what she could do to help him. The mother held her daughter's hand, supporting her, but suddenly her face changed, and the mother suddenly let go of her daughter's hand and stood up from the chair. She said with displeasure that now they would have problems, since this engagement had been approved by the Empress herself. Samantha was silent and bowed her head. Then her mother continued and told her that while she was with Tom Reacher, she had to show everyone what a faithful bride she was. Then she sternly said that if this doesn't work, she will think of something else. "Do you understand me?" she asked her daughter, and Samantha answered her, "Yes, Mom." Lawrence's mansion, servant Mason reports to Brooks. Mason said there was a recording of the conversation with the first prince, adding that he had received an original copy of the conversation. The Marquis thought for a moment and said okay, and ordered them to continue preparing further. They should finish everything in a year or two. The servant said that they also found a woman who looked like Madame. Mason continued that Viscountess Felgeris was very similar in appearance and age to Madame. She had no family, so they would quickly organize everything. Brooks asked the servant if Felgeris was far from Solaris. The Marquis began to think that, on the other hand, Claire could become free if she left this place and changed her name. The servant asked the master why he was thinking. Was it because of Madame that he was not sure? "What are you saying?" asked Mason's hero. And he shouted at the servant to stop talking nonsense and leave there. Mason said, "Yes, sir," bowed before him, and left the office. As soon as the servant left, Brooks leaned back and sighed heavily. He thought about how he would destroy the Bronson family as he had planned. And what will be the expression on Claire's face when she sees him like this? No, he told himself. By that time she would no longer be Claire Bronson or Claire Lawrence. By that time she would be called Bella. Will she be angry with me? The hero asked himself. On a sunny morning, Claire sat in the garden and had breakfast alone. The heroine began to remember her kiss with Brooks over and over again. Why do I remember that day? The heroine thought, and suddenly dropped a cup of hot tea. Ouch! The girl screamed and jumped back from the table in fright. The maid was also afraid for Madame and asked the mistress if she was okay. Claire replied that she was fine, and the maid said that she would quickly bring everything necessary for cleaning. When the maid left, Claire began to wonder what was happening to her. The heroine again began to remember her kiss with Brooks. Then the girl told herself that no, it was all an illusion. The one who plans to kill her in the future, and the one who married her because of his goal to kill the Bronson family. Knowing all this, the heroine for some reason still feels such awe towards him. Within a few months, Brooks would destroy Bronson's family, and eventually he would kill her as well. And Claire can't fall in love with such a person. She can't, but why doesn't her heart listen to her? At the Spring Mansion, Charlotte asks the Marquis of Spring if he wants to become the Duke of Spring. He stood facing the window and answered yes, because all this time the Springs had the status of a marquis. Then he turned to her and said that now, after this long humiliation, she didn't think it was time for them to act. Charlotte responded that if they used Lawrence to get rid of Bronson, it would only make Lawrence stronger. Marcus Spring told her that he had a guarantee that Lawrence would then be defeated. After a short silence, Charlotte asked about Myrtle Sanchez, whether they could trust the words of a woman whose origin they did not even know. Marcus Spring looked at her and said that Charlotte was too young to solve this problem. She got angry and turned away, told him that she understood, asked for forgiveness, and said that it was time for her to go. Marcus Spring didn't say anything to her. He just looked after her and smiled slightly. Charlotte left the room and was beside herself with anger and said how much longer he was going to ignore her. Then suddenly a maid came up to her and said that it looked like something bad had happened. The maid came closer and said with a smile, "Charlotte Spring." And Charlotte looked at her and also said her name, Myrtle Sanchez. Charlotte came closer to Myrtle and told her not to be so presumptuous. She was just a servant. As Charlotte Spring walked away, Myrtle called after her that Emily Smith did not die of a heart attack. Miss Spring turned to look at her in surprise, and she continued that Emily had in fact been killed. "And Mrs. Lawrence will soon be in danger," Myrtle Sanchez said. Charlotte couldn't believe it and asked again about Emily. Was she really killed? The maid was about to leave on her business, but Charlotte stopped her and asked how she could believe her words. Myrtle replied that she could believe if she wanted, or she could not believe. It was her will. Charlotte got furious and told her not to think that she was so easy. "I'm not like my father," Charlotte Spring shouted and left. Myrtle stayed and began to tell herself that she had thought so. It would be very easy. Ellis Engels came to visit the main character at the Marquis Lawrence's mansion. She bowed to the lady and said that from today on she would be joining Lawrence's first squad. "Greetings, madam," said Ellis, and the girl replied that she hoped she would be a faithful knight. Claire said she was surprised by her sudden greetings. Ellis replied that she just wanted to tell her that she had been officially knighted. She then added that from now on, when on duty, she would use respectful speech and address her as a lady, and after work they would communicate as friends. "Okay," said the girl, thinking that Ellis had become a knight. Then the heroine decided to ask, "They also have knights. Why did she decide to go here to them?" Ellis didn't expect such a question, then replied that Ella actually doesn't like it when she holds a sword in her hands. She continued to tell that their late father was not a good man. After their mother's death, their father squandered his wealth and became cruel to the servants and Elle. "Thanks to him," Ellis said, "her father never hit her." Then she learned fencing to show her father that he was wrong. "But one day our father disappeared," Ellis said, "and she didn't even have time to prove anything to him." Claire looked at her with pity, and Ellis said it was a bit sad, but she felt relieved now. The heroine listened to her story and only spoke clearly. Ellis said that Elle thinks that because of knighthood, she has given up all plans for the future, but in fact she enjoys fencing. The girl smiled at her and said that it meant she had found her true path. "To be honest, I wanted to apologize to you," Ellis suddenly said. Claire looked at her carefully and waited for her to say something. Ellis said that she actually bonded with Claire because of her father. The heroine looked at Ellis in surprise, and she said that her father had disappeared for some time. She then continued that even after 10 years since his disappearance, he was officially declared dead. Ellis clenched her fists and told Claire that she had thought about killing him herself. "But someone told me that someone wanted to kill my father before me, and I wanted to make sure if it was true that my father died and for what reason," she said. After the story, Ellis smiled as she drank her tea and told Claire that she was not offended by the Marquis because he killed her father. Rather, she would like to thank him, because she's not sure she could do it herself, and if she stood in front of her father. But then the heroine called her and looked at her with pity. Ellis smiled at her and said that she had wanted to tell her this all along, that she had started communicating with her because of her own ulterior motives. Then she raised her head and asked Claire if she would still be her friend after all this. "Of course I will," the heroine answered and smiled back at her. Ellis was very happy with her answer, but then Claire said something that shocked her. That she would have become friends with Ellis even if her intention was to kill Claire. "What are you saying?" Ellis asked her again, and the girl replied that it seemed she felt guilty for trying to kill her father. "But I'm not much different from you. I don't care about the well-being of my family," said the heroine. Then she looked into Ellis's eyes and told her that that was why she felt irresponsible too. Ellis told her not to talk about herself like that. The heroine replied that therefore she absolutely doesn't care about it, and she is serious. Mrs. Engel said she seemed to be worrying for nothing and put her hand in her pocket. And she pulled out a sealed envelope onto the table. The heroine asked her what it was. Was it really an invitation letter? Ellis said that Ella's succession ceremony would take place in 3 days. Oh my God, the girl said so unexpectedly and began to read the invitation. Ellis said that because of her worries about her father, she could not bring herself to invite her. Will you come? She asked Claire. The girl looked at and read the invitation, thought for a bit, and said that she would come. In the evening, the heroine told Brooks that she had been invited to the Engels mansion. In 3 days, this is very unexpected. We don't have much time left, said the hero. Claire told him that if he was busy, she could go alone, but Brooks said no. He said so because he didn't think they would have enough time to choose a dress. The girl objected, saying that she didn't really need to buy a dress. She had a lot of dresses that she hadn't worn yet, and she had jewelry too. But the hero told her no, something new would have to be found here. Then he said that he would pick something for her, and she agreed. The heroine looked at her husband with a smile and thought that this man was simply unstoppable. Engels County. The day of Elliot Engels' succession ceremony has finally arrived. Brooks and Claire walked into the room wearing beautiful purple outfits that matched each other very well. "The Marquis and Marchioness of Lawrence welcome to this place," said the butler and greeted them. The hero looked around and said that there weren't many people at the ceremony, and the girl said that it looked like only relatives and close people were invited. Marquis and Marchioness Lawrence, L. Engels called and approached them. He greeted them and thanked them for coming today. The heroine smiled and said that they were grateful for inviting them. And Brooks kept thinking about Al Engels. He thought he was kinda weird. "Wait, I'm here too!" Ellis ran up to them with a smile and hugged her brother from behind. "Thank you for coming," Ellis said, and Claire replied that she was thanking him for inviting them and complimented them on how good they looked. Then Ellis said goodbye to them and said that she would like to talk some more. But she needed to say hello to everyone else, then we would go, Elle said. As they left, Brooks angrily asked why a subordinate couldn't have a normal conversation with his superiors, and Claire told him that now was not the right time. And she said that at the moment Ellis is not a knight of Lawrence, but a member of the Engels family. Then a waiter came up to them with champagne, and the girl took 2 glasses. Then she turned to Brooks and said with a smile that it wouldn't work that way. They wouldn't bother the Earl and Ellis. They would just have a good time. The Marquise agreed with her and said that it was a good idea. The succession ceremony began and a special speech was given. The new count officially assumes his new duties and obligations to the people and family. Count Engels receives a medal symbolizing his new position and power. Ellis looked at him proudly and clapped her hands. She was very happy for her brother. All the guests clapped and congratulated Count L. Engels on his new position. Brooks and Claire went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, and suddenly the hero asks his wife that Count L is very handsome, isn't he? The heroine did not expect such a question, and did not immediately know what to answer him. Then, after thinking, she said that they stood out today with their outfits. The Marquis asked her what she was saying because that was not what he meant. Then the girl said that it seemed like she and Brooks had different opinions. She must have strange taste. Taste, her boyfriend asked again, not understanding what she wanted to say by this. And the heroine continued that for her there is a man who is more handsome than Count Engels. Brooks didn't quite understand and started looking around, then said, "Wait, who is this man?" And Claire laughed and said, "And who does he want to find here?" And she continued to say that this man was standing in front of her now. She was talking about him. The hero was stunned and opened his mouth, then smiled at her. Then he told the girl that she had good taste, very refined taste. "Look at that face. Is there a single flaw in it?" Brooks asked her. She replied that yes, there is. It is your character. And the Marquis told her that she had caught him. He is not very good at mental or healing magic, but that does not mean that he cannot use them. The girl said that wasn't what she meant, and Brooks coughed and said he understood. And then he asked her if she liked his appearance more than Count Engels' appearance. The heroine smiled at him and asked if he was now finished with his jokes. His face suddenly changed, and then he asked her if she thought he was doing all this for fun. Claire didn't understand why he suddenly became indignant and told him that he had just been joking. The guy told her that he was genuinely glad that he was her type, and he wanted her to know it. The girl asked him that they had just talked about her taste, and who he liked more in appearance. "Do you know who is second in beauty?" the Marquis asked her. The heroine was surprised by this question and asked again about the second place in beauty. The Marquis pointed at himself with a smile and said, "It's me," and the girl thought how shameless he was. Then the hero bent down and kissed her hand, and raising his head, he told her that a man more beautiful than him was now standing before him. The girl blushed and said that she was glad that there was no one else there. Brooks said he could say it in front of everyone if she wanted. Claire said no, she didn't want to. She didn't have to do that, really, and he laughed at her. Then the girl asked him if it was his hobby to make fun of her. The Marquis looked at her and said that she was right. Since he got married, his life had become much brighter. The way she gets angry so sweetly and laughs with her, he really likes it. The heroine had only just pronounced his name, Brooks, when they immediately merged into a passionate kiss. But suddenly a maid came in and said that the banquet was about to begin and they had to go. And the maid, seeing them kissing, said, "Oh," and froze in shame. The heroine smiled and told her that they would be there soon, then turned to the Marquis and said, "Let's go." "By the way, I forgot to ask you a question," Brooks suddenly said and asked if she liked the new dress. She replied with a smile, "Yes, it is just wonderful." The hero proudly said that he was very glad that she liked the dress. The tables in the hall were already set, but the guests had not yet sat down. Ellis came up to them with some girl and said, "Here you are." Then Ellis said she wanted to introduce someone to her. "Miss Greta, say hello," Miss Engels said to the girl. "I am Greta, from the family of Viscount Francis, pleased to welcome you," she said. But then the maid called her, and Greta apologized that she had to go, and apologized again for being rude. Claire told her that everything was fine. They would see each other again. "Miss is such a good girl, isn't she?" Brooks and Claire asked Ellis. They didn't answer, but she continued, saying that Greta was a bit busy today and had a lot of people to greet. Then Miss Engels turned to them and said that they were soon to be married. Claire and Brooks were shocked by this statement, and the hero told Ellis that he congratulated her and that the knights would need to be prepared to sing the anthem at the wedding. But now Ellis was shocked and asked what he was saying. At this point, Claire intervened in the conversation and told her that she didn't know what to say, but if it was her choice, she would always support her. Ellis suddenly screamed, asking them what they were just thinking. "It wasn't about me, it was my brother Elle who was soon going to marry Greta," Ellis said. Brooks and Claire felt a little awkward, and the heroine simply replied, understandable." Suddenly the Marquis asked Ellis if Count Engels had a fiancé. Ellis said yes, and said that they even attended a hunting competition together, and asked if he hadn't seen them then. The hero couldn't believe it. They were together, even at hunting competitions, but he didn't see them, and his assistant Will should have told him about it. And then Brooks realized that Will had deliberately not told him about it, and Claire and Ellis looked at him in surprise. Then Miss Engels told him that it seemed like he didn't know that his brother had a fiancé. Ellis thought that it turned out that Brooks was worried about Elle after all, which meant he was jealous. The Marquis seemed to love Claire very much, Ellis thought, and looked at him. Then she wondered why Mrs. Lawrence didn't believe him. Late that evening, Brooks Lawrence sat in his office waiting for Will. When the assistant entered the office, the gentleman asked him with a false smile if he knew why Brooks had called him. The assistant hesitated, didn't know what to say, and thought to himself that there could actually be quite a few reasons. And the Marquis told him with a mysterious smile that Count Engels would soon get married. "Well, that's what it is. That's very good news," said Will, adding that it meant they had to pick out a gift in his name. But the hero interrupted him and asked why he had not reported this to him, for the assistant knew how worried he was about it, didn't he? Will was a little scared by his tone and said that he was going to tell him everything. Brooks remained silent, and the assistant thought that what he really wanted was to see the maddened gentleman suffer from his jealousy. But he could not tell the truth, because then he would cut his throat. "So you were going to tell me everything?" the hero asked furiously. Will replied that yes, exactly. Every time he was about to tell him about it, the gentleman interrupted him, then got angry and left in a rage. Then the assistant began to complain that this was not right, and that if he did not listen to his subordinates, they would call him a dictator. Brooks listened silently, and Will finished by saying that Madame might not like it. "Why did you suddenly start talking about Claire?" the Marquis asked his assistant, and he replied that no one would like it if he said everything and didn't listen to others. And he also said that he now behaves this way only with subordinates. But if he does not change anything, then in the future this will also apply to friends and family. Brooks thought for a moment, then said he remembered how he had tried to tell him something many times, and Will, standing behind the gentleman, clenched his fist and thought it worked. "Were you really going to tell me about this?" asked the Marquis, and the assistant replied, "Of course, who would want him to be jealous, that is, to do extra work?" Brooks looked at him, then closed his eyes and said, "Okay, I'll trust you." The assistant smiled at him and said thank you very much. Then he suddenly exploded and asked the gentleman if he really thought that he would tell him that, since he had called him at such a late hour, and just like that, how could he treat his subordinates like that, and said that he should apologize to him. Brooks listened to him and told him that he would raise his salary by 20%, and that next month he would receive a bonus of 1,500 gold pieces. Will began to thank him and said that as a faithful servant he would serve him even more faithfully. One day, Claire was sitting in her room reading a book and drinking tea. Suddenly, a maid knocked on her door and said that Madame had a guest. "At such a late hour, I wonder who has arrived," her heroine asked. The maid said that Tom Reacher had come to see her. Claire was a little shocked and wondered why Tom had come to see her. Tom sat opposite the heroine on the sofa and remembered his childhood. He stands and looks at the bed where his mother lies. The doctors shout that the bleeding won't stop. Bring hot water quickly, but it's too late. The child survived, but the mother died. Little Tom looks on with tears in his eyes and cannot believe it. Then Tom's father comes in and shouts, "Woman, what happened? How could this happen?" His mother died after giving birth to him when he was 4 years old, and he saw his mother lying there bleeding. And little Tom's father and the servants cried bitterly. He was very young then and did not understand what was really happening. He saw his newborn brother cry, and from that day on his world changed completely. After Tom's mother passed away, his father inherited the Reacher family title. Little Tom decided to go into the garden and talk to his father, but he could not overcome a certain fear within himself. And just as he was about to leave, his father called him and told him that he did not want to become a duke. When Tom turned to face him, his father continued that he should not be ashamed of being the heir to the Reacher family title, and told him to try to become the head of the family. Then, after a short pause, he told his son that this was all he would have to do. Little Tom, leaving him, thought how helpless and indifferent his father was. He had never been close to him, and Tom doesn't love the newborn child because he killed his mother. The Reacher family now existed only in photographs. And this portrait of his mother, he doesn't remember his mother's face, but it's okay, because here he can see her in the portrait. 3 years later, at one of the gala balls, little Tom was introduced to Claire Bronson. He was told that little Claire, like him, was a member of the Duke's family, so they thought they would get along. When the girl raised her head and looked at him, and Tom saw her face, he was simply amazed. She reminded him of his mother. Then he smiled at her, extended his hand, and said, "Hi, Claire, let's be friends." The girl said good and extended her hand in response. Little Tom thought about her and called her a beautiful girl who looked like her mother. He told himself that he wanted this child to be with her because she made him feel like his mother was there. "You are very beautiful," said Tom. She thanked him and blushed a little. But then he suddenly told her that her clothes were too bright and did not suit her. The girl was surprised by this statement and said that she liked her dress, but he objected, saying that he did not like it. She looked good in ordinary clothes without any decorations. Tom pointed to a woman in simple clothes, like a servant, standing nearby, and told Claire that this was a good example. Claire said she thought the clothes were very simple, but then little Tom said to her, did she really mean to say that she disagreed with her friend? The girl hastened to answer him that she would wear whatever Tom said. After these words, the boy calmed down and, smiling, said thank you to her. "Look over there. There's a boy from the Reacher family and a girl from the Bronson family talking and standing together. They look so good," said the other girls who were looking at them. Tom and Claire were together all their childhood. They studied, played, read, were always close. And even when they became adults, they were always close to each other. One day, Tom came to Claire when she was sitting on a bench reading a book. The guy said that he loved her and he would like them to become a couple. The girl suddenly became sad and told him that he wanted to deprive her of her only friend. She didn't accept his offer, she refused him and left, and Tom simply didn't expect that from her. But he didn't give up. A year later, he tried again, and finally, Claire accepted his feelings. When they hugged, he proposed to her and said, "Let's get married," and she agreed. In the end, he and the heroine got engaged, and everything went smoothly for them. Tom seemed to calm down too. But suddenly he began to doubt whether this was truly love between a man and a woman. And around the same time, Samantha showed up, and Tom met her for the first time. In the present, Claire and Tom sat opposite each other in silence. The heroine thought about Tom, because she hadn't heard anything about him since he lost consciousness. I wonder when he came to. And why did he suddenly decide to come to her? What was the matter? Claire finally told him that if he had something important to say, then he should speak quickly and come back. She had no desire to drag out the conversation with him. Tom suddenly became furious and said that her words were too harsh. Wasn't she glad to see him? The heroine asked him why she should be happy. Now he is Samantha's fiancé. From now on, he and Claire are no longer friends, and there is no relationship between them. And she added that this is why she does not want to meet him in an informal setting and hopes that this will not happen again in the future. Tom said that he thought he would apologize to her for having to break off the engagement, and he knows that she resents him for betraying her and choosing to be with Samantha. "But listen to me, please," Tom suddenly shouted, and told her that she must divorce the Marquis Brooks Lawrence. Claire was shocked and got up from the couch and told him, "What are you talking about?" He clenched his fist and said that he himself still didn't understand everything and didn't even know how best to tell about it. He returned from the future. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Claire's younger sister. My name is Samantha," the girl said to Reacher. After he met her, he felt love for the first time in his life. And then Tom realized that his relationship with Claire was not love at all. He mistook friendship for love. Reacher sat in his office and thought about Samantha, why he met her only after his engagement to Claire. That golden hair that Claire doesn't have, that beautiful dress, that shy smile like a spring flower. He likes it all very much. And Tom wants it all to be his, wants Samantha to be his, but he can't afford to break off his engagement to Claire. After the breakup of the marriage, he does not even want to think about how she will distance herself from him. Or leave it all. Claire should always be by his side no matter what, because she replaces his mother to him, because she is his family. Therefore, it is necessary to make sure that she is the first to terminate the marriage, but contrary to his wishes, the wedding is not cancelled. Claire asked Reacher how he liked her dress for the banquet, whether it was too simple. He was silent and thinking about something of his own, not even listening to her. And then she said, "Well, you don't like flashy dresses." Then she thought that it might be too modest for a banquet and asked him what he thought he liked better. Reacher didn't hear her, and the heroine called him loudly again, and he finally looked at her. She asked if he was listening to what she said. She asked which dress suited her better. Tom told her to wear what she usually wears, something modest. No need to wear something flashy because of some banquet. And he told her to stop asking him stupid questions. Claire answered well. She put on something simple, as Tom said. They sat together at the banquet and looked at the beautiful and radiant Samantha. As time went on, he was still Claire's husband, and Samantha became Brooks Lawrence's wife. Tom was drinking alcohol all the time, and Claire came up to him and told him to stop drinking. "Why are you drinking?" she asked. But suddenly he yelled at her and told her to leave him alone. How could she nag him already on their first wedding night? "Now I am your husband, and all you have to do is obey my words," Tom told her. And he shouted at her not to touch him unnecessarily, and Claire only quietly replied, "Yes, okay." Tom sat down on the chair and said, "Damn. It's all because of Claire. It's because of her that he can't be with Samantha. Claire is to blame for this. She insisted on marriage because she knows how he feels about Samantha." Over time, Tom's dissatisfaction only grew. It was unbearably painful for him to realize that Samantha had left for another before he had tried to win her over. And one day the news came that Samantha was dead. Tom yelled at Claire that it was all because of her, and it was all because she refused to marry Lawrence. And if it weren't for her, then now this innocent girl would be in his arms. It's all Claire Bronson's fault. Because of her, Samantha died. It was raining that day. He remembers everything that Claire said that day, and all the hurt and anger. He remembers it all perfectly. But the most important thing is that he never apologized to Claire. A girl who looked very much like Samantha told Reacher that the woman was innocent. It was Brooks Lawrence who destroyed Bronson, and the missus was just lucky to survive. Wasn't that what the girl asked Tom? He looked at her and asked what she meant. Did it mean it was his fault? She replied that of course not. The girl said that it was Lawrence's fault, but several years had passed, so she asked him to relax. He had suffered enough during all this time. Tom smiled and said that she was lucky that she looked like Samantha. If it had been anyone else, he would have kicked her out of the room already. She was delighted by his words and said how lucky she was and offered to console him. Tom didn't feel guilty about being with a woman like Samantha, but Claire soon found out. It was very difficult for him then, and he believed that she should suffer too, because Claire should feel guilty for Samantha's death. The main character stood at the window and asked the maid if Tom would come late again today. The maid was silent, and the girl said that she understood everything. But Claire, despite everything Tom did, always remained close, as did the portrait of his mother hanging on the wall near the stairs on the second floor. The heroine was always by Tom's side no matter what, and replaced his late mother. But one rainy night, Claire suddenly committed suicide. In the present day, Mr. Brooks Lawrence's assistant Will came running out of breath, and he told him that here he was because he had been looking for him everywhere. The Marquise did not show it and continued to straighten his suit, then asked why he was shouting so much. What had happened to him there? Assistant Will told him that Tom Reacher had arrived at the mansion and that Madame was now talking to him. Brooks became furious and began shouting at Will, telling him how he could let an uninvited guest in, and asked him why he had decided to die for failing to do his duty. The assistant said that as far as he knew, Reacher got inside by overpowering their men. The soldiers, fearing the consequences, did not dare to stop the heir to the title of Duke of the Reacher family. And finally, Madame told Tom to come in. Assistant Will finished his story. Brooks glared at him, and he said that the lady had a couple of secret escorts, so he didn't think her life was in any danger right now. "So there's no danger now?" asked the Marquis, putting on his jacket and then saying that he would take full responsibility himself. The hero snapped his fingers and summoned a teleport and disappeared from the room in an instant. "He took off like lightning," Will said, then told another assistant that he was concerned that Tom Reacher's skills had suddenly improved. The second mate replied that even if Tom died 100 times and was reborn again, he would never be able to compare with the Marquis. Tom Reacher sat in front of Claire and looked at her intently and thought that it was really her. She didn't die. His Claire was alive just like 6 years ago. He thought that Brooks Lawrence had used magic at that time, and the magic must have affected Tom, and he had returned to the past. But Reacher wondered why Claire had decided to marry the Marquis of Lawrence this time. When Samantha had originally married him, something had gone wrong. The heroine asked him what he thought, that she would divorce him without hesitation, if only he demanded it. And she also asked him to tell her why he wanted her to divorce the Marquis of Lawrence. Tom thought for a moment and answered her that it was because the Marquis would make her unhappy. The girl asked him why, and he replied that it was because he did not marry her for love. At first, the heroine, after listening to him, fell into a kind of stupor, but after a few seconds she burst out laughing and could not stop. He asked her what funny thing he had said, and she replied that after a long time, he had only decided to tell her. Claire looked at him and told him that not everyone marries for love like he and Samantha. "Many nobles enter into marriages of convenience, so do not bother me on this subject anymore," she continued. Tom could not say anything, but only listened to her with incomprehension, and she asked him if this was all he wanted to talk about. If so, then let him come back. No matter how she lived, it had nothing to do with him. Reacher got angry, stood up, and started shouting that it concerned him too. The girl told him to get away from her. Tom continued to shout that she was not like this before. She always smiled at him tenderly and spoke to him in a soft tone. And he told her that she had never been as cold as she was now. Why was she not the same now as before? Why had she changed? The girl answered him that yes, she had changed, but his feelings had also changed. So why couldn't she change? Tom told her that he had apologized to her for being with Samantha now, and he regretted it. Claire said she didn't want to hear it and didn't want to see him again, and told him to get out of there. But Reacher didn't calm down and said that he wouldn't leave like that. He wouldn't let her go and grabbed her arms tightly. Then he told her that Brooks Lawrence had no pure intentions towards her. He was the illegitimate son of the previous emperor, and no matter how worthy a person he was, he could not immediately obtain the status of a marquis. The emperor took care of this. Tom continued to hold her hands and said that he was just pretending to be a commoner and worked his way into the aristocracy. He married her because he needed to use the Bronson family. The heroine listened to him and asked how he knew about this. He replied that he was Reacher's successor and His Majesty's closest assistant, so he knows a lot of things. And he began to think to himself that he would like to say now that he knows the future, but he cannot. How will he say that it was because of him that Claire died? Reacher continued to yell at the heroine to believe him because Brooks was using her. He's only being nice to you because he wants to get back together with Bronson. The Marquis doesn't love you, and when he gets what he wants, he'll kill you, Reacher told her. The girl looked at him, and he said that this was why she should not be with the Marquis. "Do you think I don't know this?" Claire asked him, and said that she got married already knowing about it. Tom was furious and couldn't believe it and asked her what she was talking about. Did she really know that Marcus Lawrence was the Emperor's illegitimate son? Reacher couldn't calm down and began to shake Claire harder and harder. She begged him to let her go. And at that very moment, Brooks Lawrence burst in unexpectedly. Tom Reacher immediately let go of Claire and said, "Marquis Lawrence?" And Brooks interrupted him and said that he had not yet managed to receive the appropriate title, but he already dared to burst in here. Brooks walked up to Tom and grabbed him angrily by the collar and lifted him up, and Reacher asked him with difficulty what he was doing. The Marquis said that, given his behavior, this was the last time he could easily visit them. But if he liked today's reception, he could come to them again. And with a sinister smile, he said that now he would show what would happen to him. Suddenly something crunched. The girl was in shock. Tom began to scream frantically in pain. Brooks told him that he wanted to break his neck, but he had to make do with his shoulder and let him thank his last name, Reacher. When Tom sat down on the floor in pain, the Marquis asked if he wasn't getting married soon and told him to go back to his place so as not to be late for it, and added that he felt sorry for his bride. Reacher tried to get up and shouted at him, "You, Lawrence," and wanted to say something else, but Brooks interrupted him. And he said, "Well, okay, it's none of my business anyway," and wished him a good trip back. Then the Marquis conjured a portal. The whole room lit up, and Reacher immediately disappeared. The girl opened her mouth in surprise and told the Marquise that Tom had disappeared in an instant. Brooks asked her if she was hurt. Claire replied that she was fine. The Marquis looked at her wrists and saw the marks, the bruises that Tom had left, and told her that she was not okay. The girl told him that the wound would soon heal, so that he would not worry. Brooks answered her that all wounds in this world heal over time, or rather, their visible part heals. The guy looked at her and asked if she would allow him to cure her, and the heroine agreed. After a few minutes, he said that was it. There were no traces left, and he was very glad that the potion had helped. The heroine thanked him, then lowered her head and thought. Claire began to remember Tom Reacher, how he held her hands, shook them with all his strength, and how much pain it was for her. Suddenly, the Marquis told the girl that he would like to ask her for something. Then he took and kissed her hand and said that he wanted her to appreciate her body. She should take care of herself. To value her as if she were the most valuable diamond in this world. He would really like that. The heroine wanted to tell him something, but he interrupted her and said that if someone behaved badly toward her, then she should get angry, swear and break off ties with that person. And he added that she should never have to endure such treatment again. Claire looked at him gratefully, then lowered her head and said okay. Half an hour later, as they sat drinking wine, Brooks asked her if Tom had told her anything about him. The heroine answered yes, that was what they were talking about. He said that the Marquis was the illegitimate son of the Emperor. The guy looked at her but didn't say anything, and then she told him that she didn't know how Reacher knew about it. Then she said that if he didn't want her to tell about it, he could kill her. Brooks was surprised by this statement and asked her not to say such terrible things. She apologized and said that it was just a joke. "I can't laugh at such a joke," he said, folding his arms across his chest. Then he began his story, saying that he didn't even know where to start. But then he decided to start about his mother, that she was a servant of the imperial palace. As far as he knows, his mother entered the palace because she wanted to avoid an unwanted marriage. However, later, thanks to her outstanding appearance, the emperor noticed her. And so, after some time, he appeared little Brooks. They did not plan his birth, but the emperor and his mother loved him very much. However, then a misfortune befell them when he was born. His mother and the emperor were poisoned. The empress must have been behind this. She was worried about the fact that I was born to them. The Marquis continued his story. The hero said with a smile that he was very lucky, and that in the end he stayed alive. But he can't say that he was always lucky, because after that he was taken by Count Engels and sold to the Slave Traders Guild. However, thanks to this he was able to escape the persecution of the empress, so one can say that he was lucky. The girl told him that it meant he was the first to discover his mother's body. It must have shocked him greatly since he was so young. Brooks answered yes, he was 15 then, and the memories of that day haunted him for a long time. He especially hated the smell of mint because it reminded him of his mother's dead body. Since she died because of mint tea, which contained poison, the heroine wanted to somehow calm him down, to say something to console him, but the Marquis told her not to worry so much. Because then I decided to overcome my trauma from the smell of mint, and now everything is fine, Brooks said with a smile. The girl listened to him in amazement and said that he was simply incredible, and that she, in turn, always avoided what she didn't like. She told him that she was not as strong as him. Wherever she went, She wore something simple and behaved as inconspicuously as possible. The same goes for her family. To avoid being hated, it's better to do nothing, so Claire tried to make herself loved. She gave up in advance. Then she laughed and said that after hearing his story, she realized she was wrong. The Marquis answered her that she was not wrong. She was just a different person. She smiled and answered him and laid her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for the rest of the evening. Brooks Lawrence sat at his desk in his office thinking, while a heavy rain poured down outside. He thought that in the end, their conversation led to nothing. Now Claire knows that he is an illegitimate son, and how much more she knows. Does she know that Bronson is his enemy, unfortunately? He never asked. The Marquis leaned back in his chair and said that when he saw Claire, he could not utter a word. He doesn't want to see her sad, and doesn't want to say anything to her that might upset her. And the reason why he behaves this way with her is perhaps because he fell silent and did not continue to speak. He then turned to Chloe and asked her if she knew this would happen, and so she asked him to make a promise. Chloe told him that he had to kill Bronson, then the child would be free, and if she wanted to leave, he had to let her do it. And she said that she believed that he would make her happy. 9 years ago, the Imperial Palace, the second Prince Elvis called Brooks Emilian, and she tells him that it's time to go home. Otherwise, his mother Elizabeth will worry. Brooks Emilian told the prince that he shouldn't worry, because he was already 15 years old and was no longer a child. Elvis laughed and said that no matter how old he was, he would still be a child to his parents. Then the second prince asked him if he remembered what he had told him. They would see each other again next week. Little Brooks got up from the table and told him, "Okay, he'll wait for him here until next week," he shouted and ran away. "Your Highness the second prince, are you all right?" the maid asked Elvis. He asked her what she was talking about. The maid said that this child was unclean and she should not be near him. The second prince got angry and told her not to say that. Brooks was already forced to hide from everyone all the time, which is why he had no friends, and it was not his fault that he was born out of wedlock. He asked the maid that if he also treated him badly, then who would even communicate with him? "But Your Highness, Her Majesty will be upset if she finds out about this," said the maid with concern. Elvis said it was true. His mother couldn't stand the fact that there was an illegitimate son, which made him feel even more sorry, and he didn't know how much longer these two could live. Little Brooks came home and greeted his mother. She was sitting on the sofa and embroidering. She turned to him and told him to come closer to her. He asked her not to talk to him like a child. His mother replied that she remembered that her prince was already 15, and the maid, standing near her mother, began to giggle. Elizabeth hugged her son and said that this child had grown into such a beautiful prince, and she was very proud of him. Brooks said, "Mom," and she interrupted him and whispered that in a little while he would soon be emperor. Then she showed him what she had been sitting and embroidering and said to him, "Look, I have embroidered a coat of arms for your future garment, which you will wear at the coronation." She explained that it was the imperial coat of arms and could only be worn by the imperial family. If he becomes emperor, then she too will be able to officially wear it, and then no one will dare to touch her. Then she looked closely at her son and told him that he should become the emperor. Not the father, but he would protect her. "Do you understand me?" asked Elizabeth Brooks Emilian, and he only answered Mom and looked into her eyes. Everyone knows that Elizabeth is just a mistress, and her son is an illegitimate child, so he did not inherit the Solaris name. The maids giggled, and one of them said that an illegitimate child could never become an emperor, and the second added that this was why the emperor never visited them. How long would it take little Brooks, he thought, clenching his fist. Every day his mother's illness progresses, and he can't do anything about it. All he can do is hide from everyone and calm down his beloved mother. "What are you talking about? Why should I join Brooks Emilian to commit a rebellion? What is the point of me doing this?" shouted the second Prince Elvis. And he added that little Brooks was not plotting any treason and asked the first Prince Travis from whom he heard this. The first prince sat in a chair and smiled sarcastically at him and asked if he really thought there was no point in doing this. He wasn't sure. And he told Elvis that he was the second prince, and by right he followed Travis to the throne. Even his mother supported him, so he had no chance of becoming emperor. Elvis was taken aback, and Travis continued, saying that this is why Elvis decided to get a naive and obedient child to sit on the throne and rule it in secret from everyone. It's all quite logical. The second prince shouted that this was nonsense. He had done nothing of the sort, but Travis told him that many had already seen him spending time with this boy. And he said that because of these witnesses and what he told his father, he thinks his father will believe him, and not Elvis. The second prince did not know what to answer to this, and then the first prince told him that if he gave up his right to inherit the throne, then he would keep his mouth shut, thereby saving Elvis's life. Elvis asked again, stuttering, about the right to the inheritance, and Travis told him that he had told him not to communicate with that illegitimate child, but he had been seeing him in secret from his mother, and now let him see how everything turned out. Your unnecessary sympathy has trampled your bright future. If you want to be offended, then be offended as much as you like, said the first prince. And he added that if it weren't for this child, the second prince wouldn't have to go through all this now. Little Brooks sat at the table in the garden eating his breakfast all alone. He looked at the empty chair and wondered why Elvis hadn't come. Maybe something had happened to him. Maybe he was busy with work and that's why he couldn't come. Yes, that's probably the case, he thought. After some time, Bruxamillion conjured a portal and immediately found himself in the Emperor's mansion. He stood and wondered where the second Prince Elvis was now, maybe in his office. Elvis sat at his desk in his office and recalled the words of the first prince, how he said that if he gave up the right to inherit the throne, then he would keep his mouth shut. He also told him that Elvis's unnecessary sympathy had trampled his own bright future, and if he wanted to be offended, let him be offended as much as he wanted. As he sat thinking, suddenly a hand touched him, and when he turned around, he saw little Brooks standing behind him. Elvis asked him what he was doing there, and he replied that he had snuck in using invisibility magic, something he had trained in before. The second prince looked at him and thought that it meant he could use such magic, and Bruxamillion told him that he did not come at the promised time, so he decided to come to him himself. Then he said that if he was busy, maybe he could help him. If it was paperwork, he could be of use to him. But suddenly, to little Brooks' great surprise, Elvis stood up abruptly and told him to go away and never come back to him again. Brooks, Emilian asked what happened, and the second prince yelled at him that he never wanted to see him again. "Brother, what has come over you? What have I done wrong? If I have done anything wrong, let me make it right," said the boy. And then Elvis told him, yes, he was guilty. That's right. It was his fault for sympathizing with someone like Bruxamillion. He continued to yell at him and said that it was little Brooks's fault that he was born, and the second prince ruined his life by getting involved with him. His existence itself was a sin. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he said to him, "Brother Elvis, what are you saying?" And he answered him not to pretend that he didn't understand anything. It was all because of his mother Elizabeth. Then he added that he was aware that she wanted to make her son emperor. Little Brooks replied that it was not like that at all. His mother was mentally ill and she was not serious. But Elvis said that she really did say that. Did he think anyone would believe that a mistress who seduced the emperor and gave birth to an illegitimate child would not want to take over the throne? And he continued to speak angrily that Helga and Bronson knew about the nonsense that his mother was talking about. And there were also witnesses among the palace servants. Bruxamillion listened to all this with tears in his eyes, and Elvis still did not calm down, and told him that now the boys blamed him for the treason, and in order to avoid reprisals, he must give up the right to sit on the throne, and all this is because of him. The boy began to cry and said that he had not planned to cheat, that he had never even thought of such a thing. It was enough for him that he could live peacefully with his mother. "I wanted a quiet life, so I deliberately hid my magical abilities," said little Brooks. And Elvis opened the doors and was about to leave, but suddenly told him that if he really wanted this, then he should have shut his mother's mouth. And at the end, he added that sooner or later he and his mother would be killed, so he should go back and accept his fate. Bruxamillion was left alone and could not believe what had just happened, what his brother, the second prince, had said. He thought that maybe it was all a nightmare, because they became friends with Elvis right away at their first meeting. He always thought so. Count Engels was sitting in his office in his mansion, drinking wine, waiting for his guest. When she came in, he greeted her with a smile. The imperial servant Merrill Vamp came to him and asked the Count why he had called her. He told her that he had been waiting for her for a long time and was glad that she had finally come to him. Merrill said that he knew how busy she was and hoped that he understood how hard it had been for her to get here. The Count apologized and said that he called her because he had good news. She asked him what other good news. He told her that the Emperor was hiding a mistress, and, on top of everything else, He had an illegitimate child. Meryl was stunned and asked again if the emperor really had a mistress and a child. Count Engels asked if anyone knew his mistress. It was Elizabeth Green, the one Meryl Vamp hated so much during her time at the academy. She said, "Wow, that's amazing," and added that this was very unexpected news if the Count already knew about it. Then it was not a secret. He hugged her and said yes, the emperor had tried to hide it for a long time, but the empress herself would soon know about it, and now Elizabeth's peaceful days were over, and she thought that her child would also soon die. Then he added that, to be honest, he felt a little sorry, since Meryl herself knew how the Count desired Elizabeth during their studies at the academy. So if she's going to die soon anyway, maybe I should take Elizabeth and have some fun with her before that. The Count asked Meryl Vamp. She told him that he was crazy, that she was the Emperor's woman, and if they found out about this, they would kill him immediately. The Count said that the fact that she was the Emperor's woman excited him even more. She was charming, because she had managed to bewitch the Emperor himself. Then he said with a smile that he already had a woman with red hair prepared. They just needed to be swapped, and he didn't care about the child. Meryl Vamp was drinking wine and thinking to herself what strange things the Count was saying. He turned to her and asked if she didn't want to see Elizabeth fall to the very bottom. And he reminded her that she had never managed to defeat her at the academy, and didn't that make her angry? She looked at him silently, and the Count said that of course she would get something for this. After the end of this matter, he would give her 70,000 gold, and she would live under a different name. Like yours, he asked her. Meryl thought for a moment and replied, "Well, okay, I agree." Little Brooks walked home and remembered Elvis's words that they wanted to execute him and his mother. He had to do something. He had to protect his mother. He must protect her from the Empress, and he is the only one who can do it. No one dares to threaten his mother. The Empress and the First Prince are a threat to her. They want to harm her. Brooks will protect his mother, and to do this he will have to kill these two. The Empress and the First Prince were drinking tea and suddenly began to choke. The maids were very scared for them and began to shout, "Your Majesty the Empress and Your Highness the Prince." A child born on the night of the witch moon gains powerful mana. Most children die, unable to control this power, but little Brooks survived. And as he grew older, he began to use magic on his own without studying it. Ancient people who were ignorant of magic called a child born on the night of the witch moon demons. Then it turns out, thought little Brooks, that he is a demon. He approached the Empress and the Prince, lying on the floor, and wondered if they were dead, because he hadn't even had time to think that he wanted to kill them. Had he really done it? Suddenly, a servant fell to the ground near him in fright and said, "Prince Brooks-Emilion, what are you doing here?" The boy looked at her and thought, "It turns out she sees him." The invisibility magic ended, and he asked her if she knew him. She covered her mouth with her hands and thought, "Damn, why did I say that?" He came closer to her and said, "You are the one I saw several times in the palace, and you are Meryl Vamp, who studied with my mother at the academy." Little Brooks looked at her and said that if she knew him, then nothing could be done. Meryl got down on her knees and began to beg the boy not to kill her. She would not tell anyone that she saw him today. Then she raised her head and said that she would not tell anyone anything until her death, and hoped that he would change his mind because she knew Elizabeth. Brooks hugged her and said okay, but she shouldn't tell anyone anything. Nothing that happened should leak out. "You understand that?" he asked Meryl. She answered, "Okay, I won't tell anyone anything," and ran away. The boy was left alone and thought it was good that it turned out this way. He didn't have to kill anyone else. The second prince sat in his office, leaning back in his chair, thinking about how the Empress and her older brother had unexpectedly died. What happened, he wondered? Who killed maybe one of the nobles, although they are not strong enough to pull off such a thing? In any case, his brother is gone, he told himself. Then little Brooks suddenly appeared and asked Elvis with a smile if he liked his gift. He looked at the boy with surprise, and he asked him why he was here. It seemed he had a lot of work. The second prince was furious and shouted at him, asking why he had come here again and what gift he was talking about. Then it dawned on him, and he asked Brooks if it was he who had killed the Empress and his brother. The boy clapped his hands and said with a smile that, as expected, he was very smart, and told him that everything was right. It was all his doing. And he admitted that it turns out that he can use more than just invisibility magic. "And what will you do next? Kill me?" asked the second Prince Elvis. Brooks-Emilion answered him that he should not thank him, because he wanted to put him on the throne. The second prince asked him again what he meant by "on the throne." But the boy just smiled at him and told his brother not to forget that he had helped him. And he added that he would make Elvis an emperor, but if he forgot about it, his heart would stop immediately. Brooksimilian walked and thought about the words he had said to his brother, that there was no turning back. But what should I do next? I'll think about it later. So much has happened today, he told himself. And he said that he was too tired, he wanted to meet his mother sooner, and he wanted to rest in her arms. The boy entered his mother's room and called her, then asked why her lights were off and where all the servants were. He couldn't understand what was happening. It smelled like mint. He wondered if it was mint tea. It was strange because Mom usually doesn't drink mint tea. Little Brooks walked closer to the chair and saw his mother's hand sticking out from under the sheet on the floor. "Mom, what's wrong with you? You've spilled all your tea. Wake up, Mom. You're the mother of the future emperor," the boy said. He started crying and saying that she couldn't lie on the floor like that. It was dishonorable, Mom. Brooksimilian started telling her that he had such a hard day today and he got hurt to protect her. He did something he didn't want to. He sat on his knees in front of her and said that this was why he wanted to see her so much. "So," he said, and began to cry even harder, and began to say, "Hug me, Mom, please, Mom." The boy lay down on the floor next to his mother and began to whine and call for his mother. Suddenly, Count Engels came into the room and said, "Damn, this is not what we agreed on. Why did everything go the other way? Why is the child alive instead of Elizabeth?" He stood there and swore and said, "You idiot, what have you done?" Little Brooks lay there wondering who this man was. He didn't know him. He just wanted to rest. The boy woke up the next morning tied with chains in some kind of cart, looked around and asked where he was. The man who was sitting in front and controlling the horse turned to the boy and said, "Well, you're finally awake." Then he asked, who was probably interested, where he was, and said that this was a slave cart, that Count Engels had sold the boy to him. Little Brooks sat and wondered who this Count Engels was, and the man continued and said that he did not know who this boy was, but now he was just a slave. But he doesn't have to worry. Since he's handsome, he won't do all the dirty work. Then the man said with a smile that usually children in slavery die quickly, but a handsome man like him could last for several years. Or if he likes it himself, he can teach him the secret of survival. Brooksimilian looked at his handcuffed hands and thought that he was now a slave. A certain Count Engels had found him and sold him. He thought about what would happen next. Then he pushed these thoughts aside, that it was better not to think about it. He didn't care. His mother died, and he didn't care if he died like this. The man called the boy, but he did not answer and lay down. And then he said that the baby was very boring. Little Brooks had already been brought to the market, and an influential-looking woman and a man approached them. The woman said with a smile that she would give 100,000 gold pieces for this child. The man who was selling the boy suddenly asked her if she was Chloe Waldorf and told her, "Okay, take the boy." Then, taking his money and leaving, he told her that he hoped she would like the boy. Chloe looked at Brooksimilian and said that she could smell his body and ordered the servant Mason to take and wash the boy, then return him to the meal. Chloe Waldorf was already sitting at the table in the living room and having dinner. The servant came in and told the lady that he had brought the child. She looked at the boy and said that after his bath, he looked as handsome as her trained eye would have expected. Then she ordered Mason to sit him down at the table and asked the boy that he had not yet eaten properly, and therefore first, let him eat. They served him a huge steak with vegetables. He started eating and asked what they wanted to do with it. Then he said that if she wanted to use him as a toy for entertainment, then she should know that he would not be able to give her what she wanted so much. Chloe smiled at him, drank her wine, and said that he was still so little. Then she said that it looked like she would have to teach him a lot, and she needed to start with his manner of speech. In the end, this woman did not drag him into bed. Instead, she taught him arithmetic. She also taught me how to use a sword and magic. Chloe then taught him dancing, etiquette, manners, and also taught him how to communicate with people. Brooksimilian suddenly asked her why she was teaching him this. Shouldn't she just teach him how to behave in bed? Chloe hit him over the head with her smoking pipe and said to him, "Hey boy, you think too much of yourself. You are still too young to warm my bed." He touched his head where she had hit him and wondered how much longer she would treat him like a child. Suddenly, Chloe told him that she was joking. She had a reason why she decided to teach him. She stood up from her chair and said that she actually knew who he was. He was Prince Brooksimilian. The boy said that she was an incredibly smart person since she was able to recognize a prince in some slave. Then he asked why she brought him here. Knowing who he was, it was quite risky. Chloe looked at him and said that he is a very greedy child because he wants to get power, strength, and money. But the only thing you don't crave is love, she said, looking him straight in the eyes. And she added that he just didn't want this because love always leads to grief. And after these words, the boy turned away from her. He began to remember his mother and said, for example, like my mother who fell in love with a cowardly emperor. Chloe told him to promise her one thing. She would give him Waldorf, but in return, he had to destroy Bronson. Then this child will be free, Chloe said. But Brooks-Emilian did not understand which child she was talking about and asked her if she was talking about the Bronson family child. She told him not to be so impatient. She would tell him everything slowly. Then, with a smile, she began to tell that this was a very old story. Waldorf had a girl named Angelina Waldorf. And that's where the story ends, said Chloe, putting out her tobacco, then asking him if he promised he would do it. He was a little shocked and said that it was hard to believe, but he also didn't think she was lying. Then, thinking, he shouted, well, he promises her that he will do it, and added that he hates traitors who refuse their words, so he swears on his soul. But in return, I will get everything the Waldorf family has, Brooks-Emilian told Chloe. I have to do this, Claire, and I'm not asking you to understand me, he said. Chloe told him to repeat the following words after her. I swear that Claire Bronson will be safe. He told himself that he would do it. He would take revenge on everyone who made him like this, and he would no longer live in fear and hide from everyone. Time passed, and after Chloe's death, the hero became the head of the Waldorf family and changed his name to Brooks Lawrence. And thanks to his many exploits, he was summoned to the imperial city of Solaris. Brooks had already been to the castle, and while looking at the pen, he said that it was hard to find such a high-quality item. As expected, the Imperial Palace used high-quality items. I like it very much. Can you give it to me, Brother Elvis? Said the hero. Elvis was shocked. He didn't expect to meet him and said, Brooks-Emilian, what are you doing here? Then he said, no, wait, what do you want? Brooks told him, oh my God, Brother Elvis is all you can say to your little brother you haven't seen in 9 years. Then he said with a smile that he had come such a long way to meet him and that he must not have recognized him because he had changed his name. Elvis asked him if he was Brooks Lawrence who owned Waldorf. The guy answered correctly, and he was disappointed because he thought his brother would recognize him right away. Brooks said that in any case he is alive, and he is here to meet his brother. It seems he has not forgotten his words and is very happy about it. And he added that he didn't need this pen. It looked good, but it was trash. Trash whose only beautiful wrapper was the packaging. Brother Elvis couldn't believe it and said to himself, he's back! Brooks-Emilian is back! A grand ceremonial ball was taking place in the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace. As soon as Brooks Lawrence entered, everyone began to whisper and say, look, the head of the Waldorf family has arrived. And there was also talk that this time he should receive the title of Archduke. He is very good at business. And they discussed how handsome and capable he is. A man came up to him and said, why shouldn't he cooperate with their family? Their family has a very good piece of land. Brooks didn't listen to him, but just thought how annoying it was. But suddenly he saw a girl with long brown hair and said to himself, this is the Claire Bronson Chloe was talking about. The hero looked at her and thought how these clothes didn't suit her. They looked shabby. And he heard that she was engaged to Tom Reacher, but why was she wearing such clothes? Brooks began to watch Claire and Tom as he held her hand and said something nervously. The hero chuckled and thought that it seemed like Tom Reacher didn't want other men to look at her. She was definitely related to Chloe, he told himself. But anyway, he thought, he had promised Chloe that he would help her. Brooks felt that he didn't need to interfere in Claire Bronson's affairs because she liked Tom, so he thought everything would be fine, because once she got married, she would have nothing to do with the Bronson family. But Claire said to Brooks on the balcony, please marry me, but don't fall in love with me. And he said, okay. It was a marriage of convenience without love, and they both believed that they did not need love. Then he wanted to give her a new identity, with which she could live peacefully and thanks to which she would not be connected with the Bronson and Lawrence family. Brooks thought that this would be enough to fulfill his promise to Chloe. But the hero would really like it to be that way. At a time when he was supposed to be strengthening his relationship with Reacher, he should have been restrained. But he was so angry that he couldn't stand it, and also these injuries to Claire. She said it was no big deal, but for some reason, every time she hid her pain, Brooks got angry. After all, the heroine looks so sad and he doesn't want to see her sad face. He wants to protect her smile. The Marquis wondered when he had become so attracted to her, and said that he would have to tell Will to put aside all matters related to Bronson. The maid told Miss Samantha that Madame had ordered her to eat only a couple of spoons of soup today. Since her fiancé has passed out, she must show that she has no appetite at all because of this. Samantha told the maid, "Okay, you can take everything," then lay down on the floor and started to lament how much longer she had to do this. And also for some man whom she doesn't love at all. She only managed to flirt with him a little, and he immediately fell head over heels in love with her. And even if her mother told her to be with him, she still doesn't need such a carefree and heartless man. Samantha sat down and said how she wished she could go away somewhere far away again and never come back alone, but unfortunately that was not going to happen. Suddenly, the nanny came running to her and said, "Miss Samantha, we have trouble. The girl got scared and asked what happened. Did her mother really make a fuss?" Nanny said that wasn't the issue, but that it was about postponing her engagement to Reacher. Duke Reacher was sitting in the garden as usual, tending to his flowers, and asked the servant, "Tom went to Devil's Ridge again." The servant replied that yes, he had broken loose and gone there into the mountains. The Duke shook his head with displeasure and said that everyone in the family was adequate, and only he was always doing something strange. He knew Tom wasn't good enough, but he appointed him as his successor based on his sword skills. However, he broke off his engagement to the eldest daughter of the Bronson family, and then decided to get engaged to another girl. And then, without saying a word, he ran away to the Devil's Ridge. "I'm not going to put up with this anymore," said Duke Reacher. He then told the servant to tell the Bronson family that they were going to postpone the engagement. Afterwards, the Duke thought that Tom was not fit to bear the title, and he was going to pass the title on to his younger brother Michael. At this time, Tom found himself on Devil's Mountain, in the middle of a dense forest. It was raining heavily, and wolves began to surround him. "Damn, they never end," Reacher said. He told himself that he had to get back to Claire as soon as possible. She must not know Brooks Lawrence's true intentions. Tom positioned himself to ward off any attacks from the wolves with his sword, thinking to himself that if he had known things would turn out this way, he would have married her right then and there. After all, Brooks Lawrence's real goal is to destroy the Bronson family. "I won't let him kill Claire," Tom shouted furiously, "no matter what it costs him, even if it means sacrificing his knighthood. I will tear Claire from Brooks Lawrence's death grip," he said, and swung his sword, then shouted furiously that he would do anything to make her love him again. Claire and Brooks were having a meal, and the hero told her with a smile that he wanted to go on a trip with his wife. The girl was very surprised and asked what trip and where. Brooks replied that a lot had happened lately. They needed a change of scenery and a trip to the suburbs. "What do you say?" he asked her. She didn't know what to answer at first. Then she said that she didn't know that he had another wife besides her. "And you have such a close relationship that you even planned to go on a trip together," the heroine said. The Marquis laughed and said that now he only had one wife, and her name was Claire. And the girl said in surprise that she didn't know it was her. The heroine suddenly began to remember how he was married to Samantha in his past life, so she thinks that she is not the only wife. Then she began to think about how interestingly he and Samantha lived in marriage. He was so kind to her too. But her thoughts were interrupted by Brooks, who called her and said that she had asked about another wife, and asked if there were rumors going around that I had another woman in the capital. She thought she had overreacted, so he had imagined something too much, and she told him, "Yes, I heard rumors that in the capital you were seeing some beautiful blonde every day." Brooks was surprised and said what kind of rumors these were. "This type is clearly not his taste," the heroine asked. "Is it really not his taste, and what is his ideal type then?" "I can tell you," he began, and said that his ideal type is a girl with long brown hair. Claire smiled and asked him if he meant her, didn't he? The most typical classic move. The Marquis said that, whatever the case, he had taken a couple of days off and wanted her to join him, and they would definitely have a good time. Then he told the heroine that if she didn't like trains, then she shouldn't worry. He would come up with something else, just if she said so. "Because your husband is capable of doing this for you," said the hero. She smiled at him and said, "Okay, let's go on a trip." When they arrived at the station and the heroine saw the train, she was simply stunned. She asked Brooks if it was his train. He said yes, and that the train company itself was his, so there would be no one else on the train. The Marquis looked at her, then extended his hand and said, "Well, let's go." They were driving, and the girl was looking out the window and admiring the views, and said what a beautiful landscape it was. Brooks replied that he was glad if she liked it. Claire sat down and said that this was actually her first trip. Brooks was surprised by this and asked if this was true. since he had heard that the Bronson family went to their own country mansion every year. She answered yes, everyone went except her. She didn't want to disturb their family idyll, because without her they were all very happy, and she never expected anything from them, so she didn't care. But now she realized that traveling wasn't so bad after all. The hero looked at her and said that it was probably because he was with her. The girl laughed and said, who knows, maybe. Claire admired the Marquis and thought to herself that she must not hope for anything. Her feelings must not change. She knows she shouldn't fall in love with Brooks Lawrence, but suddenly he interrupts her thoughts. The hero touched her cheek, then ran his fingers through her hair and said that he was already looking forward to their journey together. The girl blushed and looked at him shyly and said that she was also really looking forward to it, but she thought to herself that she couldn't make her heart beat less often. They arrived at a huge waterfall and the heroine gasped in amazement. "How beautiful! This is the first time I've seen a waterfall," said Claire. Brooks replied that it was the same. The hero said that when he came out into the world after a secluded life in the palace, a lot of work appeared. He visited many places while learning how to manage a trading company, but unfortunately he was unable to visit any tourist spots. "You were in charge of the affairs of a trading company, so the roots of your wealth grow from there?" the girl asked him. Brooks replied that yes, he was helped by the head of the trading company. She handed over the position of manager to him. Claire became interested and said that it was obviously an extremely large company. Would she know about it? Brooks wanted to say something else, but suddenly a heavy downpour began. The hero took the girl by the hand and told her to run after me. The Marquis took her to a cave to wait out the rain and gave the heroine his jacket. A couple of hours later, the sun finally came out, and the girl said, "Brooks, look, the rain has stopped." They came out of the cave, and Claire said, "Thank God." She thought it would rain for a long time. "Let's go, madam," Brooks said, and the girl asked if they were already returning home. He smiled at her and said, "No, I'll show you something else amazing." By the time they arrived at the place, it was already dark, and the hero brought the girl to an amazing place where flowers grew in the middle of the lake. Claire's mouth dropped open in amazement, and she said, "Oh my God, that's what you wanted to show me." Brooks told her that the lake, reflecting the night sky, was truly a beautiful picture, and the sky had cleared after the rain and was even more beautiful. He turned to the heroine and asked if she would like to dance one dance on the lake. The girl asked in surprise if he really should dance right in the water. He answered her no, not in the water. The Marquis extended his hand towards the lake, conjured something, and a bright blue glow appeared. Then he took Claire by the hands, pulled her along with him, and said with a smile that they would dance on the water. The heroine was in shock, looked at her feet and said, "We are actually hovering over the lake." "Did you do it with magic?" the girl asked him. He answered correctly. With magic, everything is possible. Afterwards, he said that he also prepared music for the dance, and as soon as he snapped his fingers, suddenly wonderful music began to play. "Please, madam," he said to Claire, extending his hand, inviting her to dance. And they began to dance almost all night, hovering over the lake and looking at each other. The next day, they boarded the train again and continued on their journey, Claire and Brooks sitting in the compartment, looking out the window, telling each other funny stories. They also visited a large farm where they looked at horses, deer, bulls, and other animals. Along the way, we ate all sorts of delicious food and just fooled around. Once they arrived home, Brooks handed her the photographs taken during the trip. The heroine was met by her maid, Mia, who thanked her for the gift her mistress had brought her. "I will keep it carefully," Mia said, and bowed to the lady, and Claire smiled back at her. Then she told her that she felt much refreshed after the trip. It seemed that the trip had been a great success. The heroine blushed a little and touched her face and asked, "Really?" And the maid asked her where she wanted to go next time. Claire said with a smile that she didn't even know. She thought she would like it everywhere, because it was her first trip. But she was incredibly happy. Mia said that she understood her and would pass it on. But for now, let the lady rest, and if she suddenly needed something, call her. The girl thanked the maid and began to look at the photographs from the trip. Then I told myself that I wanted to travel again, but then I blushed and thought, well, I just got back from a trip and I'm already thinking about a new one. Suddenly a strong wind blew and she looked towards the window and wondered when they had managed to open the window. Then she went to the window and thought, why is only this window open? Maybe Mia forgot to close it. But suddenly she saw a strange note lying on the windowsill. The heroine took the note and wondered where it came from. The note said, "Brooks Lawrence will destroy the Bronson family. Come alone to the appointed place." The girl was furious and began to think, then looked around. I wondered, and began to think about who the hell could have left this note.